Hello and welcome back to another video on my channel. My name is Jet Smith and I'm here today to teach you all about how to do informative speaking. We'll talk about preparing, performing, and succeeding in this event. So what are we going to do? We'll go over a lot of different topics, but the main idea is we'll talk about the logistics of the event, how to write an informative speech, and how to get it performance ready. We'll talk about what informative speaking is, its rules, its norms, how informative speaking is judged, what some good examples are, how to choose a great topic, researching informative speeches, outlining informative speeches, fleshing out the writing, editing your speech, memorizing your speech, visual aids, rehearsing and delivery, and then finally some resources and some final thoughts. You should be willing to listen to me about this because while I might not be the premier person of informative speaking, I've seen every single speech that has made it to finals in Inform at least twice. I've coached multiple NSDA qualifiers in the event, an Idaho State speech informative speaking champion, and multiple informative speaking finalists. So I love this event and I'm excited to get to add some resources for it because chances are if you're watching this, it's because you know that there are not a lot of great resources out there for this event yet as it is so new. So what is informative speaking? It is an instructional and educational speech that is composed by the student. The goal of an informative speech is to teach the audience about something significant and relevant by offering new information or new perspectives on the subject matter. That's kind of my definition, but according to the Competition Events Guide by the NSDA, or National Speech and Debate Association, it is a speech written by the student with the intent to inform the audience on a topic of significance. Students in informative may use a visual aid. Informative gives students the unique opportunity to showcase their personality while educating the audience. An informative is a well-researched and organized presentation with evidence, logic, and sometimes humor to convey a message. Types and topics vary greatly. So now we're going to talk about the rules of informative speaking. So rules, starting with the purpose. An informative speech is an original speech designed to explain, define, describe, or illustrate a particular subject. The general purpose of the speech is for the audience to gain understanding and or knowledge of a topic. Any other purpose, such as to entertain or convince, shall be secondary. The use of audio-visual aids is optional. Second, contest. This contest comprises only memorized speeches composed by the contestants and not used by them during a previous contest season. Third, subject. Effective speeches provide new information or perspectives on a topic, including those that are widely known. The responsibility for choosing a worthwhile topic rests with the contestant. A fabricated topic may not be used. Any non-factual reference, including a personal reference, must be so identified. Fourth, aids. Audiovisual aids may or may not be used to supplement and reinforce the message. If used, should enhance the or support the message rather than distract from the presentation. No electronic equipment is permitted. Any object requiring an electrical cord, battery, or solar power to operate it, projectors, cell phones, radios, iPads, computers, is not allowed. The use of live animals or any additional people as visual aids is not allowed. Items of dress put on or removed for illustration during the course of the presentation are considered costumes and may not be part of the contestant's presentation. Visual aids may not violate policies as dictated by local and state law enforcement. Fifth is length. The time limit is 10 minutes with a 30-second grace period. Should a student go beyond the grace period, the student may not be ranked first. The ranking is up to each individual judge's discretion and no minimum time is mandated. Sixth is quotation. No more than 150 words may be direct quotation and must be orally identified and in a printed copy of the speech. Seventh is the script. Manuscripts must be available in the event of a protest. The script must identify the quoted materials, state the number of quoted words, include a works cited page in MLA or APA format, and both the speaker and the coach must attest that the speech is the original work of the student. Lastly, reuse. A student may not use an informative speech the contestant used in a district or national competition in any previous contest year. You can find all of those rules in the High School Unified Manual, but now that we're on the same page, understand that some states have different rules that you'll probably have to check. For example, Idaho has a rule that you can't sing for more than 1 minute of your speech, so your state might also have rules about informative speaking that the NSDA does not. So now that we know what you are, legally, I guess, required to do or not do in informative, what are some of the norms, the unspoken things? Well, first of all, is to be professional. That means usually dressing business casual to business proper, using clean language, steering away from controversial topics. Now, again, these are norms, and sometimes people make their speeches all about violating these norms, but they're things to keep in mind. You should think really big about your topic and really small about your topic. What I mean by that is it needs to be big enough that it affects a significant portion of the population, but not so big that you can skip over really vital information or only be able to scratch the surface of the issue. So it's got to be a topic that is specific enough to be interesting and focused, but not so specific that you don't have enough to say. Lastly, is you should use a structure. Now, the speech most of the time should resemble a 5-paragraph essay. The 3 main points are going to cover lots of different things, like the history of your topic, the science, fundamentals, controversy, specific applications, implications, all those types of things. And we'll spend plenty of time on that later. You don't have to use intro, 3 main points, conclusion, but you do need a structure, and that's the most common and best one. If you are enjoying this video, please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Some future videos that you should be seeing from me are all about prepared and impromptu topics in world schools, how to flow no matter what type of debate that you're doing, how to do extemporaneous speaking, and how to do after dinner speaking as well. And if you want other ideas for videos, please comment down below and I will do my best to get to them. So now let's talk about how it is judged. So the 3 criteria from the NSDA that judges are supposed to use is relevance, relatability, and originality. For relevance, they should ask, is the topic timely? Is the thesis clearly established? Does the delivery assist in establishing the importance of the topic? Next is relatability. Can the audience relate to the topic? Is the delivery personable? Does the speaker establish how others are impacted by the topic? Does the speaker do a good job informing? Originality. Does the speaker address the topic in a unique, inventive way? Are the supporting examples new and interesting? Those are all from the NSDA. I've created my own rubric, and I break it down into 5 categories to judge an informative speech on. The first of which is sources of support. Does the speaker effectively incorporate evidence, examples, humor, and optional visual aids to support their speech? Second, content and organization. Does the speech's content encompass a memorized, organized, and compelling introduction, set of main points, and conclusion? Third is vocal delivery. Does the speaker exhibit strong vocal communication skills through their rate, pauses, projection, and vocal variation? Fourth is physical delivery. Does the speaker exhibit strong physical communication skills through their body language, focal point movement, facial expressions, and gestures? Fifth is topic development. Does the speaker take a relevant, relatable, and innovative approach to topic selection while demonstrating societal significance for their subject matter in a manner that makes full use of their allotted time? So, what are some good examples of informatives that would receive high scores based on these rubrics? Well, luckily, I have created a playlist for you on my YouTube channel with 25 different informative speeches from the finals rounds of NSDA Nationals. There's 3 main categories of topics that seem to make it to finals, and I think that most topics should fall into one of these things. The first of which is science and technology. That would include examples of speeches like It's a Bird, It's a Plane, It's Aviation, Sizing Up Our Fashion Footprint, Blood in the Water, or The Hard Hormonal Truth. Then for culture and habits, we've got Spoken Differences, Autism and Minecraft, Oh What Fun, and All In. And then the third type is social and structural topics. The Birds and the Weaves, Beyond Pink and Blue, Loud and Proud, and Born in the USA would all be examples of this. You can also see a link that categorizes all of the informative speeches into different topics so that you know if I want to do a science topic, what are some examples that I could look at? You can click on this Google Doc for more information. Now, next, how do we choose a topic in informative speaking? We want to focus on coming up with significant, relevant, and innovative issues, things that people need to know about, things that people have never heard of or thought about, don't understand or misunderstand, or don't value or overlook. That is what makes a great informative speaking topic. Technically, you can do your informative speech on anything, but it is rare for a topic that does not fall under that kind of description to see any sort of, meaningful success in terms of, finaling at NSDA Nationals or at state championship tournaments. So 5 things that you can ask yourself to try and come up with about a topic would be looking at what do you love about the world, what do you hate about the world, what do you wish people knew about, and what do you wish people understood differently about the world. So if you can come up with 5 things in each of those 4 categories, then that gives you 20 starting places for topics. And sometimes you'll find that there's a lot of crossover so that you could combine things together, and then that would tell you, wow, this is something I'm really passionate about, so I should definitely do my speech on that. You can look for some examples that I've put underneath those things. Your topic must also be able to answer the question, why does my audience need to know about this? The audience should go, what? Or no way, 2 or 3 times at least during the speech. They should be learning things that they've never heard of before, and the topic must make a lasting impact on them. So here are some questions that you can ask yourself to come up with topics. What is your niche interest? What is something that you already know a lot about, more than most people do? What do you want to learn about that you don't know a lot about already? What are you passionate about, and what is going on in the world? And that can also be a source of coming up with ideas for topics for yourself. So for each of the issues that you manage to come up with after asking yourself these questions or going through these categories, you need to be able to answer for them. Why me? Is this something that you are genuinely interested in, passionate about, or personally connected with? If not, it's going to be hard to motivate yourself to want to work on it for like 6 months. Why now? It should be timely and relevant to the audience. Why them? As in, it should be relatable and inclusive to the audience. Why this? It should be originally inventive, digestible, and clear. Why invest in this topic? It should be deep and researchable, needing a long time to work on, not something that can be solved with a simple Google search. And why bother? What is the purpose of learning about something like this? Your topic should have something about it that is hope inducing and makes us believe that the world can be better, or at least help us believe that things that are bad are potentially avoidable. If it's all doom and gloom, it might not make the best topic. Then you're going to take your 5 strongest, significant, relevant, and innovative issues, and you are going to turn them into some sort of topic template. I've got a lot of examples here, like the science or process of AI's environmental strain, the history of literacy rates, the definition of social media algorithms, the modern manifestations of gerrymandering, the specific applications of animal agriculture to meat consumption, the controversy around libraries, the positive implications of policy debate, the fear of reality television, the targeted implications of narcissism would all be examples of kind of topic templates. Then for these 5 topic templates that you've come up with, you should ask yourself these things. Validity: is the subject matter real and impactful? Does it affect a sizable group of people meaningfully? Significance: does the topic ring as highly consequential and deeply important? Relatability: is the topic as self-identifiable as possible for as many people as possible? Depth: can you find enough high-quality research evidence and examples for this subject matter? And digestibility: is it easily understandable and approachable for broad types of audiences? If the answer to these questions about one of your topic ideas is no, then I would not use it. Lastly, great informative speaking topics must be able to answer the who, what, when, where, why, how questions. And those each kind of get into a different category of information that audiences want and need to hear. The first is the who questions, and those are about humanity. Who are the key players, figures, characters? What are the stories who have been real people affected by the subject matter? What is your relationship to the topic? The what questions are like the foundations of everything, the most basic information. What are the unknown but fundamental, essential pieces of information? People who are brand new to your topic and even experts on your topic should learn something new. We have the when questions, which are about time. What are the origins or the ancient history of your topic? The evolution or the distant history of your topic? The recent history, the current or the present? What is the modern evolution or near future of your topic going to look like? And what does the distant future of your topic look like? You should be able to answer at least a couple of those questions with any good info topic. Then we have the where questions, which is applications. Where do we see this in the real world? Where do we see it geographically around the world? What societies and cultures? What types of people are demographics? What parts of the economy, social services, research? What parts of the audience's own life do they see this topic manifesting in? Or could they see it if they were more aware of it? You've got the why questions, the implications. This is essential. Why does the audience need to know? Why bother? Why care? You can highlight the current positive or negative consequences of your topic on the world. You can forecast hopeful or fearful future consequences. You can focus on individual or local or societal consequences, or more national, international, global consequences. And lastly, you've got the how questions, which is the process. Walk them through the step by step of your topic, the cause and effect, the interdependent factors, the relationships that can explain everything. So once you have come up with a bunch of ideas and you've run these ideas through the ringer of all of these different questions I've told you to ask yourself, turn your topic ideas into a purpose statement. So because society is blank, I want to inform my audience about, because you have to have a reason for why you want to teach the audience about it. Then take that purpose statement and form it into a thesis statement, which is the overarching concept for the entire speech that lays out the overall subject matter that you are going to teach the audience about and why they need to learn about it. So I've got a bunch of examples of informative thesis statements. I'll read a couple and then you can pause and read the rest yourself. And these are all for different types of topics. Given artificial intelligence's massive potential environmental impacts, it is essential that we organic life forms gain some real intelligence. We must gain a better understanding of the scientific literature surrounding literacy education before there's nobody left that can even read it. Considering that the average American now spends between 4 to 6 hours a day consuming content recommended to us by social media algorithms, I'd recommend we learn how those algorithms work. Learning to use our voices requires learning who is even responsible for listening to and representing those voices. So it's time to take a gander at gerrymandering. Those are all examples of theses in informative speeches that will later be included as part of your introduction. You can also read more examples if you want to pause. The next step is to research for your informative speech. Now, why do we research? Well, sometimes we feel like we have a great idea for a topic, and if you try to research your topic and you can't find anything about it after using the tips that I'm about to give you, then that probably tells you that your topic isn't as valid or good to do as you originally thought it was. This is also how you become an expert. You don't want to just include the first 10 minutes of information that you find. You want to be able to learn 100 minutes worth of stuff to say about your topic and then pick the best 10. Whereas a lot of people will just write the speech and then find research that matches what they already said. You want to learn, become an expert, and then teach after you're an expert. It also helps the audience go deeper on the topic when you have great research. They learn more than they could on their own. You can make it more relevant to them by finding new examples. You can make it stand out. The speech, if you're struggling to get it to hit 10 minutes, research really helps. It's not really informative if you're not telling them something that they probably already know. Like if you just know it without having to research it or without having to research it in the past, the audience probably knows enough about it too, so you're not really informing them. It's also a great idea to do tons of research because every article that you find might have photos in it or graphics in it or images in it that could make for really great stuff on your visual aids. So doing lots of research helps you with the visual component too. When do we do research? All the time, but really when you're coming up with, choosing, and refining a topic before you do any outlining, drafting, or writing of the speech, and throughout the season. I know that it's tempting to start writing before you research, but you've got to learn as much as you can before you even start typing anything other than summaries of research. How much evidence should you be using? I'd suggest between 1 to 3 pieces of evidence in your introduction, 2 to 5 pieces of evidence for each of your 3 main points, and then maybe 1 new piece of evidence in your conclusion. If you didn't know it before researching it, you need to cite it. A lot of the times you hear people give informative speeches and it's like, well, you clearly got that from an article, but you're not telling me where you got it from, which is plagiarism, and we don't want to do that. Like I said, watched every single informative speech that made it to finals and took meticulous notes and analyzed them. And so some things to know, 82% of the speeches in NSDA finals, so out of the 60 of them, it was over 45, had 8 to 20 sources. So plan on having that much. The average number of sources in NSDA finals was 12.28, and the median and mode was also 12. So that's a decent ballpark number to shoot for number of sources. So, where do we actually do our research? There's a lot of different places to find stuff other than just the front page of Google. You can get academic sources from places like Google Scholar, journals, studies, briefings, research papers. You can ask or find stories of real people, reviews of products or of books. Polls, forums, social media blogs. You can consult traditional media, which is also good for visual aids, magazines, books, and newspapers. You can look at your personal experience for some things, your memories, stories of your family members and friends, your teachers, community members. You can look at entertainment media, movies, TV shows, news, plays, sports, art. You can look at news media, local journalism, national news, international news, current events, and then some miscellaneous media. Read philosophy, look at cultural traditions, find nursery rhymes, fables, children's stories, advertisements, historical events. All of those are things that could serve as evidence for your speech. The goal is to have a balance of types of support for your claims, but the most important types of sources to find are great academic, traditional, and news sources, specifically when you are doing informative speaking. So, what exactly are we researching? We want to find our significant, relevant, and impactful/innovative issues definition and fundamental nature. You've got to know what it is. You want to find your topic's historical context and evolution. What are its scientific properties, processes, and functions? What are its modern applications or places we can see it in the real world with specific examples? Current and future consequences, myths and misconceptions, relationship to other topics that are significant, relevant, and innovative. What debates, disagreements, or controversies are happening. Not every single topic is going to have a ton of information with this, but when you have some sources that apply to each of these categories, you'll do a much better job at choosing your main points and being able to give the best information, not just the first or most obvious information you find. While you're looking in these areas, you are really looking for real world examples, proof of how widespread or unknown but powerful and everywhere, omnipresent your topic is. You want pop culture connections to your topic and warranted explanations for why the facts are the facts about your topic. You also need the evidence and to try and tell the audience something and then show them via your visual aid, and evidence is part of that. You also need to be able to name, explain, prove, and impact your topics, and that is what evidence helps you do. Your evidence helps you answer those who, what, when, where, why, how questions we talked about, and you want to make sure that you maintain a balance of analysis, examples, and statistics related to your topic. So, how exactly do we research? Well, whenever we find a source, we want to evaluate it using the CRAP test, which is currency, relevance, reliability, authority, and purpose. Is it recent enough to still be true? Is it directly related to my topic? Is the information verifiable via other sources? Does the author or publisher have the proper credentials to be talking about this? And is the purpose to teach me something or to sell me something? And depending on the answers to those questions, that tells you if the source passes the CRAP test or not. You also want to annotate your sources. Pull out those annotated bibliography skills from English class. Read a source, cite the source immediately if you think you couldn't all use it so you don't lose it. Summarize what the source was talking about, and then extract quotes or the most important things from it. Otherwise, you're going to do all this research in advance, and then when you actually go to write the speech, you're not going to remember where you found your research, or worse, you'll have a gigantic list of all these links, but you won't remember what any of them talk about, and then you have to reread them anyways. So annotate your sources. It seems like it takes more time, but it ends up saving you time in the long run. You also need to track your sources. I would make a separate document from your actual speech writing document to save everything on and to keep a running works cited page. And then at the end, you can just see all the sources you used and copy and paste over your works cited page instead of having to make it the night before district scripts are due. You can also organize your sources by the type of sources, the takeaways from the sources, the purpose of the sources, what points they would be relevant to. You also want to vary how you use your sources. You can't use more than 150 quoted words, and honestly, direct quotes aren't even all that common at all. You most often want to paraphrase your sources and summarize your sources. So paraphrasing is when you basically take exactly what they've said, but you change the words around a little bit, whereas summarizing is, again, creating a basic explanation of what you gained from the reading. And that is the best way to use your sources. Sometimes people say according to, or explains that, but there are actually 64 different ways that you can introduce a source in a speech. And I've created a document that has all of those different words. So feel free to steal from that. And make sure that you are avoiding lecturing. You don't want to sound like someone who's just presenting a research paper, and you don't want to sound like a know-it-all. So you need to make sure that you are using your sources to provide your like to create your analysis, not that you are just a mouthpiece for sharing sources that anybody could have found on Google. We also can ask for help with research for your coaches, your teammates, families, and friends. Send them articles and be like, hey, do you think that this is interesting? Did you already know this information? Do you think that I should use this? Send them, your speech and ask them to evaluate just the evidence that you're using to see if you need more, if you need less, if you need to use the evidence differently, so on and so forth. Now we'll talk about outlining your informative speech. There's three main things that the main points of every informative speech needs to do. You need to provide exposition, application, and implication of your topic. So exposition, most often in the first main point, answers questions like, what is your topic? When did your topic start? And how does your topic work? Whereas the application point is answering, where do we see this topic in the real world? And then your third point is almost always implications. Who is affected and why should I care? Now, you can move these things around. Sometimes each of these questions are answered in all 3 points. Sometimes the second point is another first or another third. Sometimes there's implications in all of them, applications in all of them. But between your 3 main points, you've got to make sure that you provide your topic exposition, application, and implication. That is the problems, causes, solutions of informative speaking. Problems, causes, solutions, or causes, effects, solutions is the most common strategy or understanding in oratory. And everyone kind of seems to think, oh, you can make your 3 points whatever you want in informative speaking. But truthfully, having watched every NSDA finals round, a ton of Idaho State finals rounds, every example I can find on YouTube, the speeches that seem to succeed, these are the 3 main points, or things that are inside the 3 main points always. And you got to make sure each of these questions is answered at least once, but honestly, each main point should answer 1 or 2 of these questions pretty thoroughly. So let's talk about how to outline in general. The order should be outlining your main points, then your introduction, then your conclusion, then your transitions. When I say outlining, I mean that we are taking like the skeleton of the speech of, okay, I know that I need this, 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 and this for my introduction, but instead of writing it all the way out, I'm just going to write 1 sentence or 1 phrase for each part. You're essentially creating, the sketch before you go in and fill it in. So that's what I mean by outlining. And yes, you should always research and then outline. Do not just jump into writing, as much as it's tempting to do so. How many points should you have? Well, 56 of the 60 speeches in finals had 3 main points, but 1 only had 2, 2 had 4 main points, and 1 actually had 6. And there's been somebody who's made it to finals every year from 2021 through 2025 who's had a different number of main points. So you can get away with more or less than 3 main points, but I personally wouldn't recommend it unless you are doing it for a very specific reason. Once you decide how many points you want, you need to create buckets or groupings of information that will form the basis of those 3 main points. Choose the aspects of your topic that will form your main points before you start writing them. Sort your sources, your information, your ideas, the thing that you've learned about the topic into, okay, these all seem to go together here, these seem to go together here, and these seem to go together here. What is the structure of a main point in informative speaking? You want to always start by transitioning from the previous point. Then you're going to give a topic sentence or the central premise, the main idea of the point that you're saying. Usually, depending on the type of content you're going to be sharing in the main point, you have between 2 to 4 components or supporting ideas that are supported by like research and examples and things like that. And then you always want to finish your point with a concluding statement of relevance and importance. So sum it up essentially and tell us why it mattered that we just learned that. You also need to use your sources. If you're not sure what to write about, what are most of the people that are writing about, and follow their lead in terms of what are the main things that they choose to focus on and how they categorize their content. But let the research guide you. And also write with your visual aid in mind. Make sure that the main points that you're covering, there will be something in each main point that would be benefited by having some visual component that will make it better. So, main points in informative speaking, you should always plan on naming it, explaining it, proving it, and concluding it. If you're not sure how to get started or write a main point, this is the formula. So, you're going to start by naming it. So, clearly signpost and state the topic sentence of the subpoint or of the main point, the specific idea or argument you're trying to prove. Then you explain it. Clarify, explain, and elaborate on the topic sentence to make sure that we understand. Then you're going to prove it with evidence, examples, and research to support, demonstrate, verify, confirm, validate, and give credence to the argument or idea that you just made. And then you're going to conclude it by telling us what is the significance, the meaning, or the conclusions that should be derived from the information that you just gave us. So each main point typically has between 2 to 4 supporting claims. So for each of those 2 to 4 supporting claims, you're going to explain and prove them. Your speech should not just sound like a BuzzFeed listicle. So what about first main points? Let's dive into the 3 main types of first main points. You talk about the history, origin, and evolution of your topic, or you talk about the definition, key concepts, basics, and foundations of your topic, or you talk about the science, process, and functions of your topic. Virtually every informative speech that has ever made it to NSDA finals has their first main point as one of those 3 things. But there are some rarer options as well. You can discuss the relationship between your topic and a related topic. You could talk about myths, misconceptions, and misinformation related to your topic. Or you could break your topic down into 3 application or implication areas. And so instead of doing exposition point 1, application point 2, implication point 3, you basically do, in this area of life, exposition, application, implication. In this other area of life, exposition, application, implication. But this is pretty rare for a first main point. When we are outlining, our goal is to create a blueprint, and outlining is good because it helps us avoid writer's block, it avoids us being repetitive, and it helps us avoid missing really important logical steps. There's a difference between outlining and drafting. Drafting is when you are trying to get up to, the 1,500 word count so that you can actually read it out loud for the full speech and memorize it. Outlining is when we are creating the skeleton that will later become the speech. So here's some information about first main points in informative speaking. Many first main points are a mixture of these categories. It's not rare to have them only fall into one, but there's plenty of first main points that talk about, for example, both the definition of the topic and the history of the topic. But these elements are very commonly found in the speeches in NSDA finals. So first up, the most common type of first main point is about the history or the origin or the evolution of your topic. This represents about 70% of first main points in NSDA finals, which is about 42 out of the 60 speeches. It covers the chronological progression and important milestones or moments in the timeline of your topic's development. It often begins with either the earliest known instance or ancestor or predecessor of your topic's existence. You trace the evolution through different time periods, linking it to significant pivotal turning points or catalyst events, social shifts or societal or cultural contexts. You want to talk about influential figures like investors, theorists, inventors, celebrities, politicians, and you usually shed light on how these events got us to where we are today and how they help us explain why things are now the way they are now. The second most common type of first point is the science, the process, or the function of your topic. This is about 40% of first main points in NSDA finals. So in about 24 of the speeches do we see this as a first main point or part of a first main point. You're going to outline, explain, and exemplify the core scientific, technological, psychological, physiological factors at play to make sure that the audience understands how your topic works. You will offer the step-by-step manner through which the subject matter occurs. You're going to define and illustrate key scientific terms that are core to the topic's functioning. You're going to offer empirical, landmark, and groundmaking research studies and expert opinions to lay the groundwork of your core of your topic. And you're going to use analogies and metaphors to simplify complex ideas to ensure comprehension. Third, we have the definition, the key concepts, the basics, or the foundations, which is in about 17 out of 60 of the NSDA speeches and finals, which would be probably around 27, 28% or so. And this is where you cite an expert or an authoritative definition of your topic, and then you break down your topic's complex concepts into their components, their types, or their categories. Explain the underlying mechanisms, fundamental principles, and essential elements that clearly establish and distinguish your topic from what it is to what it is not. This is often used for topics where the audience has never heard of it or knows very little about, and it usually begins with the most simple or central information and then builds upon it in increasing levels of complexity. So a lot of first main points, pretty much all of them fall into one of those categories, but there are some other things that typically come up in first main points too. So the next kind, or most common, is when you address myths, misconceptions, or misinformation about your topic to get it out of the way at the beginning of your speech. This is in about 21% of first main points in finals, so about 13 out of 60 speeches. So you present one to several misconceptions or widely held but false beliefs, and then you explain what the belief is, how it started, why people believe it, and you present information that deconstructs or disproves that. Usually you begin by outlining and defining the key characteristics of the main topic of your speech to make sure that we at least are on kind of the same page. Then you break down this information. This could include correcting historical misunderstandings or erasure, incorporating scientific understandings or processes, defining what the misunderstanding is as a separate issue from the actual topic. Another option is to establish the relationship between your main topic and a related subtopic, which is in about 15% of first main points in finals, or about 9 out of 60. You are going to begin by clearly outlining and defining what are the key characteristics of the main topic of your speech. Then you're going to explain how and why the two issues, your topic and your subtopic, are inherently intertwined together. What are the underlying causes, similar interests, or motivations that keep them locked and interlinked? This could be the historical origins or beginnings of the topic and establishing a connection that was formed a long time ago from the main topic to the subtopic, or it could be the intrinsic characteristics or scientific mechanisms of the main topic that naturally lead to its relationship with the subtopic. Lastly, you can do that thing where instead of doing like exposition for your first point, application for your second, implication for your third, you could do a point that puts all of them together in one specific area. So maybe somebody's first main point is medicine, their second main point is fashion, their third main point is construction. So in this case, you're going to examine your topic's real world applications and implications in a specific subject area, economic sector, sphere of public life, research field, and you're going to develop how the topic interacts with that area, give us examples, and give us impacts. And this is in about 5 out of 60 speeches, or 8.33% of those that have made it to finals. Now let's talk about the second main point of your speech. So this is where you most frequently do applications. Where do we see this in the real world? Now, some people's second main point looks almost exactly like a first main point. They just do one of the different options. So if their first main point was science, maybe their second main point is history. So the second point is the most flexible of all of the points in informative speaking. It follows like the least rigid rules, and it has the greatest variety in the types of things that are talked about. But there's still some pretty clearly defined categories that seem to work, or at least appear in finals most often. So you can talk just like the first main point about the history or the origin or the evolution of your topic, the science, the process, or the functions of your topic, the relationship between the topic and a subtopic, the specific application or implication areas of your topic, or you can do one of these new things. You can talk about the underlying causes, contributing factors, and influences that explain your topic. You could discuss the controversies, debates, and disagreements over your topic. You could talk about positive or hopeful or negative or fearful implications, which is most often a third point, but sometimes is also a second point. And most commonly, you can discuss the modern, current, real-world manifestations. Where do we see this? So second points are a combination a lot of the times of exposition, application, and implication, but application is the most important thing to do. Now that the audience knows what your topic is, they have to know where it is. Where do we see this in the real world? So this is in at least like explicitly real world manifestations is almost 50% of all of the speeches and finals. So 26 out of 60 talk about this in their second main point. You're going to show the audience where your topic can be seen or already is being seen or used in the real world. You're going to identify 2 to 4 areas of life, law, research, culture, the economy, where the topic is present and active or where it could be directly applied and observed. You're going to offer specific examples, cases, concrete instances of your topic's interaction with the area, and you're going to explain how and why the topic is manifesting in these ways in the real world. Usually it will have some minor or first step level implications, but it will develop implications or the consequences and the effects more in the next main point. The second most common type of new second point that we see is discussing the underlying causes, decisive factors, or contributing influences of your topic. This is about 26.66% of second points in NSDA finals, which is about 16 out of the 60 finalists. You're going to expose and explain the hidden or unknown pressures and connections that are behind your topic's existence, behavior, nature, etc. You're going to identify distinct causes that are physical, biological, psychological, perceptual, social, economic, cultural, all of those different causes, and then offer explanation and proof for why those are such powerful forces that are resulting in your topic's present state. Provide real-world examples, cases, and instances to influence and prove your analysis. Another increasingly common type of second main point that's been popping up a lot more in the last 5 years is discussing the controversies, debates, or disagreements around your topic. This is in about 8.33% of second main points, where it's the main focus, but it's often touched on in many more. You are going to address and explain the complex disputes and differing opinions on your topic to create a shared understanding and offer nuance. If your topic is controversial, this is a great point to include. So you're going to present the first side, which is often the most common side, but maybe it's ill-informed. You're going to present the first side's claims, reasonings, and supportive evidence to paint it in a fair light. Because remember, in informative, we're not really making an argument per se, or we're not taking sides on an argument. We do want to make sure that we present people with all of the arguments, and then they have enough information to choose for themselves. But then you're going to do the same thing with one or more of the opposing sides of the argument. What do other people think? And then you're going to show where the core disagreement between the two sides lies. Where possible, you should try and show compromise and offer middle ground or nuance. And you also want specific examples of how this controversy plays out in the real world in terms of policies and politics, public opinions, and social divisions. But remember, those are just kind of the new or like specific to the second point types of second points. A lot of the times your second main point is something that could also be seen as a first or could also be seen as a third. So the next most common type of second main point is what we usually associate with the third, which is implications, the consequences. This is in about 21.66% of second main points in NSDA finals. About 13 out of the 60 finalists used this. But you distinguish it from the third point by covering a different aspect of the implications. So maybe second is current implications and third is future implications, or second is negative consequences and third is positive consequences. You also have the science and the history, which again are most commonly first main points, but sometimes are second main points. The science is in about 13 out of 60, and the history is in about 15% or 9 out of 60. But you want to make sure that you avoid losing the audience's interest. There's usually more application to where do we see this now or where do we see this in the real world when science and history are used as a second main point instead of a first main point. You also could talk about a specific application or implication area. Remember, sometimes instead of breaking it down to first is exposition, second is application, third is implication, you have 3 areas of the world or of, life that you examine all 3 in. So you could do a second area. So if the first one you talked about the economy, maybe the second one you talk about research, right? And then the last option is establishing a relationship between this topic and a subtopic. This is not super common, but it's in 5% of speeches, so it's common enough, where you try to connect your main topic to a related subtopic, and this is also pretty common if you do this in your first main point. So maybe the first main point is the relationship between A to B, and the second main point is the relationship between A to Z. So second main points over now. Let's talk about third main points. Third main points are like the most rigid in terms of it is extremely, extremely, extremely rare for any speech to make it to the finals round of NSDA where the third point is not implications, consequences, effects, impacts. Why do we care? The third main point has to hit us over the head with that. So there are different types of applications that third main points might choose to focus on. Usually people will pick 1 to 3 or 4 of these to really go all in on. Sometimes people have implications in multiple points. It's when you use those application implication areas. Like if I'm going to talk about the economy in my first point, politics in my second point, and the military in my third point, I will apply my topic and then implicate my topic in each of those. But if you're focusing just on implications for your third point, sometimes you're going to focus in on the positive, the helpful, the useful, or the beneficial. What good stuff is happening now? Others, you'll focus on the negative, the hurtful, the destructive, or the harmful stuff that is happening now. You also might focus more on a small scale of your implications. What does this mean for individuals, for people personally, for specific targeted groups, or what does it more mean for communities, for societies, or for widespread humanity? Or you might look more at the future. What are the hopeful, promising, optimistic, or innovative ways that this topic could manifest itself positively in the future? Or what are the fearful, concerning, pessimistic, or alarming, scary ways that this topic could impact us in the future? So, third main points, implications are almost always the finals points. And these points should always identify specific consequences that are tangible, significant, and relevant. And they should also illustrate and exemplify the impacts with specific examples, cases, and instances. So you can look at positive, negative, or mixed implications to show the audience what the real world effects, impacts, and consequences are, and their inherent worth or value or detriment or harm to humanity. Negative implications often include social issues and challenges such as inequality, discrimination, and marginalization of specific groups, adverse effects of social and cultural norms and values, economic, military, environmental, and technological harms, whereas positive current implications usually would focus on problems that have already been solved as a result of your topic's current and recent results. Talk about how the topic is related to empowerment, representation, and advocacy for marginalized communities. You can also talk about lives saved and improved by the topic's presence in society. But we also might want to talk about the future instead of what's affecting us now. How will the topic continue to affect us, or how might it continue to affect us? Show the audience what the future of your topic could mean for the world. Now, hopeful implications often include solutions, but the key thing about solutions and informative is in oratory, you are saying, this is what we should do, here's how you do it. In informative, you say, this is what has been done, or what is being done, or what could be done, and you give information about it. But you're not telling the audience how they contribute to it, or say, this is what countries need to do, because you are teaching us about the solutions, not telling us to enact them. So you could talk about research and technological innovations or breakthroughs that will save and improve lives, social movements, shifts, and initiatives that are working and making progress to solve problems, policy ideas and proposals that are gaining traction and would result in positive change. But you can also talk about the potential catastrophes. What limits are we about to hit? What crises are about to hit? What historical patterns seem like they're about to repeat themselves? What are scientists or politicians or experts or doomsday preppers saying that would lead us to maybe be worried about the future? So now let's talk about the other side of implications, which isn't just are they good or bad, but are they, how many people are they affecting from the top down? So you can focus on smaller scale implications, or individual, community, family, and society. So show the audience what the impacts mean for humankind. Small scale implications usually mean where can the audience see the effects on themselves in the real world? How is the topic impacting personal development, building relationships, maintaining social cohesion? Whereas large scale implications often include the spillover effects of what happens when the topic affects individuals and families and they all compound together. And how does the topic connect or unite us or divide or separate us? You can also focus more on like number of people or region of people. So talk about local consequences, state consequences, regional, national consequences, international and global consequences. Show the audience what the impacts of the topic means for government groups, geographic areas, and citizens within and beyond the United States borders. Local and state implications often look at specific cities where the topic is uniquely and acutely impacting people, comparisons of the intensity or degree of impacts that are felt felt between states, whereas regional and national implications include groups of states that are experiencing shared burdens or benefits, what the impacts are for the whole United States or for all Americans. And then the international and global implications can look at how is the topic affecting countries outside of the United States, how is it shaping the relationships or the interactions between countries, and how is the topic harming or benefiting humanity all over the world. Additionally, third main points don't just have to be implications only. That is just the most common kind. So in 75% of speeches that made it to finals in NSDA, it is already, the topic has been exposition, given. It's already been applied, and now we're giving implications. But some choose to do application implication areas. So you look at 3 different aspects of life, you teach us about it, you apply it, and then you tell us why it matters. So about 25% of the time, the third main point is just another area to apply and implicate. The rarest kind of third main point that I don't really recommend doing is an audience-centric approach. And this is where you're telling the audience what they can do. Sometimes in the early days of informative, people were trying to tell people what you should do, but that doesn't really happen anymore. And like I said, this is only in about 3 of the speeches that have ever made it to finals. So it only really happened in the first 2 years, and I would not recommend doing this, as that is what oratory is for. If your topic was teaching people how to do something, then it would make sense that you are telling them what to do, but you're telling them what to do as an instruction rather than as like a command. But it could look like teaching the audience how to do something or how to use the topic with the information that you've given them. This is probably the most viable option, but I still wouldn't recommend it. It could look like offering the audience potential personal solutions or actions that they could take to solve problems or avoid the topic's problems. But again, that's oratory, not inform. And then you could also encourage the audience to think about something differently or to learn more information on their own. But I would just do that in the conclusion or not at all. So something that I want everyone to know, now that we've talked about these 3 main points, is none of these have to be used or have to be followed. These are just the unspoken norms that are arising in our community with informative speaking that I don't really think have been clearly shared. We like to say that, anyone can do whatever they want, and that is true, but it is very clear that there is a pattern forming, and I think we should be transparent and open about that pattern. Because either if it's a pattern that should exist, everyone should have the ability to follow it, and if it's a pattern that shouldn't exist, we have to name it so that we can challenge it. But I observed these in 10 years of informative speaking. 60 speeches, I watched every single one at least twice. It is your speech. You can do it how you want. But the goal of your 3 main points, if you want to really make an impact on audiences in a way that gets you to the stage, you need to provide exposition, application, and implications of your topic for the audience. How you choose to do that with your main points is up to you. What about the introduction and the conclusion? Because those are also parts of the outline. So these are the different steps of each of these things. The introduction will have an attention-getting device or a hook, a bridge or a tie into topic, and a segue. You're going to provide background information and contextual information. You'll establish the importance and relevance of your topic. You will give a justification for your speech often. This can either happen at this point or another point in your speech. You'll give the thesis or the central premise or argument of your speech. You'll preview the main points or provide a roadmap of them. And then sometimes after the roadmap, people have like a swag line or a because statement, kind of like ploy. Whereas the conclusion has very similar pieces, but it is typically much, much shorter. You'll transition from the final main point you gave to your conclusion. You'll review and summarize your main points. You'll bookend or tie your speech back to where it all started. You'll give a broad implication or a future outlook, and then tell us why we needed to learn this in the first place or why we need to keep learning about this. And then you'll finish with a memorable closing line that ties back to your topic, your title, your attention-getting device, or your thesis. Let's talk specifically about outlining. Do not try to outline your introduction and conclusion until you've already outlined the 3 main points. I know there's a temptation to start with the introduction because it's the first thing, but how do you effectively introduce something that doesn't exist? Worst case, if you write your introduction, then you're going to feel boxed in and you have to write the rest of your main points to apply to it, which limits yourself. Or you're going to have to go back and change the intro because as you're writing the main points, you realize things changed. So do not write the introduction first. But Why do we write the introduction? Because it engages the audience, establishes our topic, and provides a foundation for the relevance and significance of our points. Now, if you have ideas for attention getting devices or you find points or ideas that would fit in your intro, you can make a quick note of them so you don't forget, but write it down and then move on. You also need to use your intro to justify your speech's necessity and clearly lay out what the audience can think or expect to hear next. Then you will talk about your conclusion. You need to write this after your three main points, after your introduction, and sometimes even after you write your transitions. The purpose of the conclusion is to recap the journey that the audience has been on, provide narrative closure by circling back to the speech's beginning, reinforce your speech's central message, and then leave the audience with a lasting impression. So let's focus now specifically on introductions. So introductions are introducing, yes, the speech, but also you before they introduce the topic. And if you can catch the audience's attention in your attention getter, the goal of every other step of the introduction is to keep the attention and make sure that you stay keeping the attention throughout the entire rest of the speech. So the first part is your attention getting device or your hook. Usually this is between 2 to 8 sentences, and it could make up between 30 to 100 words. You're going to want to begin the speech with a captivating and catchy opening line that immediately pulls the audience in and makes them want to listen to you. This should make the audience do several things. If your attention getter is doing multiple or all of these things, that's how you know it's a good attention getter. You want the audience to laugh with you. Use your attention getter to establish a humorous moment. You want them to think with you. Establish curiosity, a quandary, or a conundrum for them to think about. You want them to remember with you. Establish a recollection of something from their past, to bond with you, to establish an emotional connection, to center on you, to give you their undivided focus, to relate to you, to establish a feeling of unity or similarity, and you want them to trust you, to establish a sense of security and your personal credibility that they can trust you. So some common attention getting devices that you will use in your speeches. The most common kind is to use some sort of personal story or anecdote, and oftentimes from your childhood. This is in over half of the speeches in NSDA finals. 58.33% or 35 out of 60 have their attention getter be a personal story. And I'd be willing to say that all but maybe 7 of those are from when they were a kid or like a recent, experience as a teenager. Then you have pop culture, current event, or historical references, which makes up about 21.66% of speeches in finals, or 13 out of 60. You also have shocking, factual, or misdirecting statements, which is about 5 out of 60, or 8.33%. Sometimes you have a direct verbal interaction with the audience. You ask them a rhetorical question, you make a comment to them, you break the fourth wall in some sort of way. That's in about 6.66% of the speeches in finals, or about 4 out of 60. And then lastly is maybe you don't start with a personal story. You start with a relatable, hypothetical, common scenario, experience, or situation, which is in about 3 out of the 60 speeches in finals. Sometimes your attention getting device is a two-parter. This is pretty common, and I think it's hard to explain, so I'll give an example. Instead of just going from your attention getter and then tying it to your topic, you go from your attention getter to another attention getter or an attention keeper and then to your topic. So in the speech, The Birds and the Weaves from 2017 by Jordan Allen, her first part of her attention getter is an innuendo joke about how, growing up, everyone's had the talk before, right? There was a bird, there was a bee who loved each other, and parents give kids the talk. Then her second part of her attention getter is that there's another talk that she got that not all of her white friends got. And that is the differences between, black and white hair, because she can't use the hotel shampoo because it's white people shampoo. She uses that to then segue into her actual topic, which is how black hair is misunderstood in society. So sometimes if you have two different ideas for attention getters, you could use the attention getter that is more far out there or not as related to your topic to then segue into the secondary attention getter and then into your main topic. After the attention getter, we have to bridge, segue, or tie into our topic because we never want to slap the audience in the face with what our topic is. Your title and the first sentence of your speech should not make it immediately obvious what the entire speech is going to be about, almost ever. This takes up around 1 to 3 sentences, 15 to 40 words, but you're going to take the logical steps from your attention-getting device to its natural and logical connection to the speech's main topic and focus so that the audience will follow along. The audience should go, "Oh, I see what you did there," or, "Oh, I never thought about it that way." They should not go, "Huh, those two things don't seem very related." So if your attention getter is too hard to connect, you've got to find a new one. What are the actual ways that we can tie these things together? The ones that I've observed in successful speeches and finals are going from A to B, which sounds obvious, but you're essentially shifting the focus, the vibe, or the direction of the attention getting device. So for shifting the content, maybe the attention getting device is fiction, and then you start talking about where we see it in the real world. You go from the specific to the general. Misdirection to your actual main point. The topic may be a small or minor detail in your attention getter story, but then you focus it and put a spotlight on it, and it makes us realize that that was the main thing. Or you can shift the vibe to get into your main topic. So you go from like a personal story to something more that we can all relate to. It's not just me, or and I'm not alone. Then you could talk about like something simple, insignificant, or shallow, but it's actually more complex than that, or there's more than meets the eye, or it's more deep or significant than that. Your attention getter could go from like funny and lighthearted to maybe you tie it into the topic by getting a little more serious. Or your attention getter makes it seem like something is basic or boring or monotonous, but now it's actually explained to be cool or interesting or unique. Another common way to segue from your attention getter to your actual topic is to reveal the topic. Because remember, it shouldn't be super obvious from what you first said. How do we do this? Well, maybe the attention getting device is a misconception, or it's not the whole story, or something is missing. We're going to bring the topic from the background to the foreground. The subject of your attention getting device might be an example, an analogy, a comparison, or a metaphor or a representation of your actual topic. Maybe the topic is the reason to blame or the explanation or the cause of what happened in your attention getter. Or maybe the topic is what you learned or what you gained from the experience that you talked about in your attention getter. Another way that we often tie the topic to our attention getter is just the topic is what comes next, right? Use the attention getting device as a starting point. Maybe the AGD was the origin of your relationship to the topic. Maybe it was how you changed your mind or you learned or you grew after the attention getter, and that's how you tie it to your topic. Maybe your attention getter posed a question or created a curiosity or made you wonder, but why or how does this happen, or where does this come from, or when did it start? Or maybe after your attention getter, what happened was you went deeper and you learned more and you investigated. So all of these are common ways of going from the pop culture or personal story or reference in your attention getting device and then funneling that down into your topic. The third part of an introduction is to provide background or contextual information, and this should be between 1 to 4 sentences or about 15 to 60 words. You want to ensure that the audience has enough of a grasp on what your topic really is about at its core before you can move on to more advanced information to avoid anyone getting lost. So, the purpose of the background and contextual information is to avoid the audience getting lost or stuck or confused by your speech, to ensure that everybody can start listening to your main points on the same page, to answer the audience's preliminary questions or concerns or objections to your topic, and to overcome mental barriers or resistance that the audience might have to your topic. So some common ways or that we establish this, or some things that you might often see done for background and context in the introduction, grounding, where you provide necessary background information, define key terms related to the topic, you clarify misconceptions, you provide historical context, maybe you give a definition of the concept or the issue that your attention getter is referencing, you illustrate by giving real world examples of what you're talking about, you preempt or challenge a preconception, clear up a misconception, or dismiss a myth by kind of telling us what it actually is. You could clarify by contrasting and comparing what people might think your topic is to what it actually is. And you also might just provide kind of a log or a time point of reference for when something began or how long the topic has actually been a thing or been an issue. So, the fourth part of an introduction in informative speaking is where we establish our topic's significance, relevance, and importance. This is between 1 to 3 sentences, and it should take you between 15 to 30 words. In this step, we ensure that the audience wants to and feels like they have to keep listening to us because you tell them that what you're about to tell them is insanely important. It's like, don't turn off the TV, don't tune out because this matters. The purpose of this is to make your speech more memorable to the audience, to prompt the audience to think more deeply about your topic, to play on the audience's like selfishness or self-interestedness, to appeal to the audience's values, to build goodwill with the audience, and to gain mental priority of your speech over your opponent's speeches in the judge's mind. Now, how do we prove in the introduction that our topic is significant, relevant, and important? I've used some debate terms. So if you're a debate kid who also does speech, these will make sense to you. But try and do 1 or 2 or 3 of these things to prove how important your topic is. These are all kind of coming from like impact calculus or ways of making arguments in debates. So the first and most common is to focus on the consequence or the impact of your topic. What is the effect on people or families, communities or societies, states and countries, or the world? What is the end result? You also want to talk about currency or uniqueness. What happened recently that makes this topic very timely? You can talk about the significance or the severity of your topic. How big of a deal or seriously or strongly is the subject matter impacting people or influencing society or the world? What is the gravity of the situation? Then you have relevance or the internal link. What broader societal issues does this subject matter also relate to or contribute to or cause or explain? What's the big picture here? Then you have relatability or the link. Where and how can the audience see this subject matter in their own lives? How does it affect the audience? You can talk about its widespreadness or its magnitude. How common, prevalent, widespread, or pervasive is the subject matter? What is the scale of the subject matter? Then you can give it priority or framing. Why is this issue the most important, the most pressing, the most deserving of our attention and of our discussion? Why does it come first before anything else? You can talk about the urgency or the time frame behind your topic. What incoming deadline, crisis, or near future possibility gives your topic immediacy? Why must this subject matter be discussed as soon as possible? And then lastly, you can talk about the topic's potential or alternative. What are the positive outcomes, solutions, or transformative possibilities posed by the subject matter? After that, we have to justify our speech. That takes 1 to 2 sentences or 10 to 30 words. Oftentimes, this is incorporated into other parts of the speech. It can be combined with the previous part pretty frequently, but you're basically telling the audience your speech's higher or overall purpose to reinforce its importance. And the purpose of the justification is to make your speech more memorable to the audience, to prompt the audience to think more deeply about your speech, to play on the audience self-interestedness, to appeal to their values, to build goodwill with the audience, and to gain mental priority of your speech over other speeches. Speeches are justified by providing statistics and data to highlight how prevalent or common or widespread your topic is, by providing expert quotes or opinions that give you credibility, and by establishing relevance to current events or recent examples. Common types of justifications for your speech. The first kind is, why are you giving this speech? What's in it for you? You could talk about your personal credibility, your knowledge, or your experience with the topic. This is often also done in your attention getter step or in your segue. You can provide your personal mission, your goal, or your purpose in speaking on this topic, which is also often done in the roadmap. Or you can share a personal concern, fear, or problem that is addressed by speaking on this topic, which is commonly done in the significance or relevance section. Then you've got to talk about why the audience needs to hear this speech. What is in it for them? Maybe it's to correct misconceptions or to provide a more accurate or balanced understanding of an issue. This is frequently done in the background or context section as well. Maybe they need to listen to raise awareness about a significant societal global issue or challenge, which is frequently done as well in the significance or relevance section. Maybe they need to do it to better understand the influences or the impacts of human behavior, identity, or community. This is also often done in the roadmap. Maybe we need to listen as an audience to gain an appreciation or the foundational knowledge base for an overlooked or misunderstood or unknown but vital item of importance or concept or subject. Oftentimes, this is done in the significance or relevance section or the roadmap section of your introduction. Maybe the audience needs to listen to learn how we got here, of the present moment of an issue and what it means for where we might go next. This is frequently done in the background or the contextual part of your introduction or the roadmap. And then lastly, maybe they need to listen so that we can better adapt or react to a rapidly changing phenomenon that is already or is about to start having really big consequences, which again is frequently done in the significance or relevance section. So this might not be a separate part or its own distinct sentences of your introduction. But if you're not establishing a justification for your speech anywhere else in the introduction, you need to do it here. Then we have the final two parts of the introduction, which are the thesis or the central premise, which should be about 1 to 2 sentences, 10 to 25 words once it's fully fleshed out. Remember, right now we're just outlining. And this is where you explicitly provide the overarching concept for the whole speech that clearly lays out the overall subject matter that you are going to teach the audience about and why they need to learn about it. You probably already wrote this when you were planning the speech, when we did in like step 6, I want to say, or choosing your topic. So you can just apply it here and then modify it to fit the speech more if you need to. Sometimes this thesis is the beginning or combined with the beginning of your roadmap, which is the 7th and final part of your speech introduction. You need to tell us where we are going next. This is done in 1 to 4 sentences between 15 to 60 words. Tell the audience what the structure of your speech's main content is going to be and what they can expect to hear throughout your presentation. This purpose of this roadmap or main points is to avoid the audience getting lost, stuck, or confused by your speech, to demonstrate your credibility as a highly knowledgeable speaker on the topic, and to help the audience remember your speech. Now, some things to note about roadmaps or previews of main points is that it's commonly expected that you have to be cutesy or stylistic, and while this is common, it's not always true. Many roadmaps are written using puns or wordplay or references to your attention-getting device. That's about 20% or 12 out of 60 of the finalists. Or it does puns and wordplay and references to the topic itself, which is in about 35% or 21 out of the 60 finalists. So 55% of the roadmaps and finals are puns or wordplay based on your attention getter or your topic. However, about 45% don't do that at all. Some people do the cutesy stuff just to begin the roadmap, but they don't actually use it for sharing what their 3 main points are going to be. They just use it for like the segue to their 3 main points. That's in about 20% of the speeches, whereas other people use the cutesy stuff for every single point, which is in about 35% or 21 of the speeches and finals. The other thing to consider with your roadmap is how much information are you going to reveal. Some roadmaps just give 1 or 2 words for each main point, whereas other people give a complete sentence to what's going to be talked about in each main point. And then at the end of your roadmap, or as part of the last part of your roadmap, some people offer a because or a purpose statement. Sometimes you give a speech justification, so you'd be doing that section here at the end instead of before. Kind of like when you've listened to a program of oral interpretation speech or a POI, how right after the roadmap they say a program. Because, insert because statement, people like to do that in informative speaking too. Or you might hear people say, before finally discussing the implications of what scientists are calling insert statistic or fact or cool statement that proves how important this is. Or before finally looking at the implications of what legal experts are saying is blah, 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 blah. So maybe you give an extra oomph to your speech by using a statistic or a source in your roadmap to share a brief preview of just how important the implications are. So either give a because statement or something like that if you haven't already justified the speech or if you just feel like doing it. Now let's talk about conclusions in informative speaking. Now, these are the shortest, least developed part of informative speeches, but they still matter. You want the speech to be able to speak for itself, and a lot of the times the third main point will help you kind of wrap up loose ends in ways so that the conclusion doesn't need to be as long. Compared to many state and local circuits, conclusions on the NSDA final stage are very, very short on average. So the first part of the conclusion is to transition from your third main point. So that takes 1 to 2 sentences, 10 to 30 words. You're signaling the end of the presentation by beginning to wrap up the speech. We'll talk more about transitions on like the next slide or two. And then part 2 is to review, recap, or summarize your main points. This should take between 1 to 3 sentences, about 10 to 40 words. You want to remind the audience what they've learned by succinctly revisiting the main points of your speech, covered to provide closure for the audience and to demonstrate follow-through, to prove that you did what you said you would in your intro, and to make the content more memorable. Now, there are different ways or types of recaps and summaries. The most common that we would understand typically is a direct reminder. Acknowledge each of your 3 distinct main points. Today, we first talked about X, then we talked about Y, before finally discussing Z. Sometimes people use the exact same structure or a parallel structure to like their cutesy intro roadmap. But oftentimes in finals, instead of directly reminding all 3 points, you do a thematic synthesis, where rather than restating each specific main point separately, you condense the speech's body points down into one overall statement that captures their general message or the outcome of putting the 3 main points together. Sometimes people just acknowledge the complexity of their topic to essentially say the topic is clearly really deep, multifaceted, and profound, and therefore requires continued learning. And that's all we really get to recap what they've told us. The third part of the conclusion is to bookend, reference, or tie back to your attention-getting device, the thing that we started with in the very beginning of the speech, or the attention-getting device part 2 if your speech is doing 2 of those. This usually takes between 1 to 2 sentences, again about 10 to 30 words. You want to complete the arc of the speech by bringing back to the beginning full circle. Different ways that you can do this is by telling us what we can take away or learn from the attention-getting device's connection to your topic, by finishing the story or the reference with an overall moral or message that you talked about in your attention-getting device. You could go back to the original concept of the attention-getting device, but with a new understanding from your speech. Or you could offer the personal growth, the lesson, or the takeaway that you've gained from the attention-getting device's relationship to your topic. So the fourth part of the conclusion is the broader implications or the future outlook. And this should be about 1 to 3 sentences, 10 to 50 words. You are going to expand on your speech's overall message beyond the immediate facts to the wider social relevance or future trajectory to ensure that it continues to weigh heavily on your audience's mind after your speech is over. They should be thinking about your speech during your opponent's speeches if you've done your job. Now, how do we actually make this broader implication or future outlook? Some ways that we can do this include, instead of a call to action like in oratory, a call for information, a direct or implied invitation to think differently and to maintain awareness on the subject, to protect ourselves or to remain vigilant. You can also offer a hopeful or cautionary vision of the future. Paint a picture of the potential future by highlighting positive opportunities or lingering challenges that are posed by your topic. You can also universalize your truth to do this. Elevate the topic to its highest level of relevance to all human beings to make sure that everybody sees how important and significant it is for us all together. And then the next part is why we needed to learn this in the first place, and or why we need to keep learning it. That should be around 1 to 2 sentences, again, 10 to 30 words. You're going to reinforce why it is crucial that the audience learned what you've just told them about your topic and why they must keep learning about it on their own. Reveal how the audience can, must, or should do or use this information. And this is often integrated into other parts of the conclusion, so it doesn't have to be separate if you're already doing this somewhere else, but make sure that at least somewhere in the conclusion, we've been reminded of why we had to learn this in the first place. The final part of a conclusion is a memorable closing statement where you tie back to your attention getting device, to your topic, to the title of your speech, or to the thesis of your speech. This should be one sentence between 5 to 15 words, and you want to leave the audience with an impactful and lasting impression. Types of memorable closing statements would be a playful or a witty or a funny tieback, end with a cute or funny reference to your attention getting device, your topic, your title, or your thesis. You could finish with a profound statement, a powerful, deep, inspiring statement about your topic's deeper meaning for life. You could talk about a personal reaffirmation, what you've taken away or learned from the topic in life. Or you could offer a challenge or talk about what's next, a final invitation or instruction for the audience's response or what they should think next. So now that we know how to do intros, conclusion, and main points, let's talk about transitions. Now, you don't write your transitions until you've outlined your three main points, your introduction, and maybe even your conclusion, because you can't transition to something that doesn't exist yet, right? Link your ideas together, why we have transitions, to make sure that the audience doesn't avoid losing you through your switching of ideas. You want to provide levity or moments of downtime or funny moments. Transitions are a good way to like bring the vibe back up if you've been talking about really heavy stuff, or to keep people like really intently listening, and they make your speech more memorable when you have good transitions. Now, when do we transition? Obviously, between each main part of the speech, but specifically, there are 4 transitions to be worried about: between the introduction to the first point, between the first to the second point, between the second to the third point, and between the third point to the conclusion. Sometimes you also have mini transitions partway through your writing, like between subtopics within a main point. But there's different types of transitions. So you have references to your attention getter, often called the vehicle. So if you use your attention getter to start your intro and then use it to start every other main point, then everything is kind of full circle, like we said. So add a new piece of information or a callback to your attention getting device and then relate that to the subject of your new point. You can also recap the previous point and initiate the new point, briefly summarize what the audience now knows, and then preview what they're about to learn. There's like the "but that's not all," or "but wait, there's more," almost infomercial type of transition where you're building upon what they just learned. And then there's the logical next step or result of the previous point. So make your next point the consequence of the previous point in your transition. So now that we know how to outline, we've built the skeleton, we have to actually flesh out the speech. But how long should our speech be? Well, the absolute minimum that I would go for, based on my observation of the speeches in finals and using some voice-to-text transcription services for them, the minimum amount of words would be 1,175, and I would not recommend going that low. The maximum would be 1,600 words, and I would not recommend going that high. My recommendation would be between 1,240 words and 1,545 words. This depends on how quickly you want to speak, how long the words that you're saying are, how you're using your visuals and whatnot. But in terms of breakdown, that means that the intro should make up about 12 to 23% of your speech's total word count. The average amount of words in an introduction is 251, and the median is about 245. 90% of introductions in finals are between 167 and 334 words. So my recommendation would be somewhere between 200 to 300 words. Then you have the body, or the main points of your speech put together. This should be between 69 to 80% of the speech's total word count. The average is 1,042, and the median is 1,038. About 75% of speeches in finals are between 900 to 1,200 words. I would recommend somewhere between 1,000 to 1,100 words for your content in the main part of the speech. And then the shortest, smallest part of the speech is the conclusion, which is only about 4 to 10% of the speech's total word count. The average long conclusion is 98 words, and the median in finals is 95 words. 85% of conclusions in NSDA finals are between 55 and 135 words. I would probably recommend somewhere between 65 to 125 words. So My general rule of thumb for what I would suggest is that your speech should be about 74.5% of the words on your main points, 17.5% on your introduction, and about 7% of the words on the conclusion. Now, this is me being over analyzing every speech in finals and looking at statistical trends and whatnot and just seeing what kind of works. But this ensures that everything is well developed enough without sacrificing something else. The only way to know for sure if whatever, formula or whatever word count you choose to use is going to work for you is if you time it a lot. Do not bother memorizing before you have timed it over and over and over again to make sure that you are never going to be going beyond 10 minutes and 15 seconds, like at the absolute most, but you don't want to plan on using the grace period because some lay judges forget the grace period. Some judges use the grace period as a tiebreaker, right? So I would say plan on not going above 950. But if you're in a finals round, you can have moments where you would like slow down to elongate. So what about the main points specifically? In general, each main point should be about 300 to 400 words. The average and median length in a 3 main point speech is 345 words for any given main point. 75% of main points and finals are between 264 and 440 words. I would recommend somewhere between 300 to 400 words per main point. For the first main point, the average and median in finals is 333. 70% of first main points in finals are between 260 to 406 words, and I would recommend somewhere between 275 to 395 words for a first main point. The second main point, the average is 352 and the median is 349. About 70% of the second main points in finals are between 280 to 447 words. I would recommend between 295 and 430. Then you have the third main point. The average and median is about 252 words. 75% are from 286 to 439 words in finals for third main points. I would recommend somewhere between 300 to 425 words long. And all of this numbers is to say that I wouldn't probably spend more than 1,200 words on my main points, and I wouldn't probably spend less than 900 words on my main points. But I used to think, and personally I still feel, like your 3 main points should probably be about the same length, right? Well, according to the speeches that are in NSDA finals, no. They don't have to all be the same length. The average gap between a speech's longest point and shortest point was 120 words, and the median was 95. There were about 15% of speeches in finals where their longest point was more than twice as long as their shortest point, which I'm not a huge fan of as a judge, and I think there's plenty of other judges who feel that way, but you don't have to make sure that each of your main points is within like 5 words of each other. If they're within 100 words of each other in terms of your longest point and your shortest point, you're probably fine. So if you need more time on one point than another, or if it's more interesting to spend more time on one point than another, then don't worry about it. But the only way, again, to know for sure if your main points are the right length is to time them. So how do we go from a full sentence outline or a phrased outline to a scripted draft? Well, you want to make sure that your speech is in general following the narrative arc. You want to start lighter and get heavier in terms of like how dark the content is. Each main point should have peaks and valleys, moments of high energy, moments of like excitement, moments of despair, or emotional variety. Generally, the 6 to 8 minute mark is when we should be achieving the emotional climax of the speech, but that can happen later in informative speeches versus oratories. Because unlike in oratory, where you have to tell us that everything's going to be great and give us a solution in the last part of your speech, we can end on a yikes, things are really bad note in informative if that's what you want us to do. No singular emotion should be dominating your speech for more than 3 sentences at a time, or it's just going to get monotonous and everything's going to bleed together. The research stuff, you probably can ignore that. Sorry, that's a leftover from oratory. You want to use lots of research, but you don't want more than 30% of what you're saying, I guess, to be paraphrasing or quoting. It should be sounding like you wrote it. What if you have no idea what else to write about? Well, you can refute the opposition. What is the strongest or most likely objection to your point and answer it? Pretend that there's an imaginary toddler asking why, who, what, when, where, how after every single sentence. And if you haven't already answered the question somewhere in your main point, you can answer it then. You can also humanize your speech. If you haven't already told a story in the speech, whether it's your own or somebody else's story, you should do that. You should have at least one real world or pop culture or historical or personal example per subpoint and main point of your speech. Ask yourself if you're supporting your thesis, and if you haven't already proven it, do that. And if you have already proven it and the speech is too short, maybe you need to expand your thesis. And then lastly is add the bells and whistles. Add humor and rhetorical devices to your writing to make it the most engaging and interesting speech that it possibly could be for the audience, which is what we're going to talk about next. I have a list of rhetorical devices that you can use in your speech here. You can Google them if you've never heard them before, but if you're using each of these once or a couple times in your speech, then you're going to sound like a super professional public speaker, and it's going to be like candy to everybody's ears. You also probably need to have some humor. While informative speeches typically cover heavy or difficult subjects, if there's no laughter anywhere in the speech, it's very rare that we are willing to be vulnerable enough to allow the heaviness to hit. By bringing us up with the humor, then we can fall that much further down and be really impacted by the sad stuff. So there's a whole bunch of different types of humor. If you're one of those people who's like, I'm not funny, you have to learn how to be funny, it is a skill. Humor is a skill just like anything else in writing. So look into these different types of humor, figure out which one is the funniest to you, and incorporate different types of humor or different types of joke to make sure that only, if you write it so that only Gen Z or only high schoolers are going to find it funny, or only people who like dark humor are going to find it funny, your speech is not going to be as wide reaching and impactful on as many audience members as it should be. Next up, we have editing your speech, which is very important. There's lots of different types of revisions, but before we go over the types, why do we revise or edit our speeches in the first place? Well, there's a strategic advantage to memorizing your speech. You get to choose 100% of the words that you say when you are memorized. And unlike, in other types of the activity like extemp, where you only get 30 minutes and your brain just has to kind of say what comes to you, if you have 100% choice, you should take 100% choice. So your job, because there's billions and trillions and unlimited combinations of words that could be said, even just about one topic, you have the strategic ability to make them the best version. And the only way to make it the best version of what that sentence could possibly be is to edit it, because you're never going to write the best version of your speech the first time that you write it. That's just not going to happen. It also shows judges that you're listening to feedback. If you compete in the same circuit, whether it's national or local, the whole year, and you get judged by the same people over and over again, and they feel like the speech is the same every time, no matter what feedback they give you, they're going to start ranking you lower and lower in favor of the people who started doing rough and then started getting better. It also helps you make sure that your delivery doesn't get stale. If you are saying the exact same 10-minute combination of words every single weekend, you're going to start watching TV in your brain or thinking about what you're going to eat for dinner instead of actually living in the moment with your performance, so it will get stale. So changing it up in the words changes it up in the delivery. It also helps us avoid autopiloting, like I was saying, when you watch TV in your head instead of actually focusing on your audience. And make sure that we are adhering to the time limit. Sometimes when we learn the right way to say something, our speech gets longer or shorter, and then we have to add or we have to remove. It also makes sure that things stay relevant. Usually you want something in your speech that happened within the last couple of months. So if your example is no longer relevant or something changed, then you might need to swap in a new one. But also we want to edit or change our speech to help match our visual aids or to help us improve our visual aids, right? So the different types of revisions, you have overhaul revisions, which is where you are doing a massive change to something. Like maybe the topic is mostly the same, but virtually everything else is changing. You have addition revisions where you're putting something into the speech that wasn't there before. Evidence revisions where you're swapping out a source, but that's kind of in the same spot, but maybe now is proving a different thing or is proving it in different words. You have cut revisions, which is where you remove stuff from the speech. Detail revisions, where you're changing the supporting information. Language revisions, where you're saying the same general vibe, but you're using different words to say it. flourish revisions where you're changing the humor or the rhetoric devices. And then you also have structure and organization, maybe the order of your main points or the order of each of the information in one main point. You move something that was down here up here. So those are different ways that you can edit your speech. But how do you know what to cut or what to add? Because that is the conundrum that plagues everybody who does platform speeches. Well, you want to make sure that you're avoiding logical leaps and that you're avoiding redundancy. So maybe you read a main point to someone and you have them raise their hand when they feel like they're confused or like there's a step that you're missing between them, and then you need to add something, or they raise their hand whenever they feel like they've already heard this before, so you're being redundant. Or you do that to yourself, and that's how you know what to cut or what to add. You can also focus on there's not just yes or no in terms of should something be in your speech. It's a continuum. There's stuff that's terrible to include all the way over here, and then there's stuff that's amazing to include, all the way over here, right? So you got to look at the sentence and be like, if this is terrible, do I get rid of it or do I improve it? And then is it meh? Is it fine? Is it good? Is it better? Is it best? If it's good, that's not good enough. Make it the best version that it can be. When you're looking like, okay, maybe this statistic is cool, but it's not as great as this other statistic that I could use. So I'm going to get rid of something good so that I can add something better. Every time you're not sure if something is working in your speech, ask yourself, what purpose does this fulfill in my speech? And then you can also look at word economy, efficiency, or stylistic appeal to determine kind of like, am I saying this in the proper number of words? Am I taking too long to say it or not enough time to say it? Do I need to be more efficient or do I need to add some more bells and whistles to draw it out more? How do you know what you want to change? If you know that something needs to change, but your ballots aren't great or you're not getting coached properly, you can read your speech out loud and record it and then listen to the recording, and anything that stands out to you, make a note of it. You can give the draft of your speech to your coach, English teachers, parents, or teammates and get them to give you some revisions. You can also give them your voice recordings or a video recording of your speech and do the same thing. Ask yourself, separate everything out, every sentence, every idea, every part of your visual aid for your speech. What is working, what isn't working, and what is missing from your speech. Then you can also read your ballots. Ask, is this the best possible way for me to say this idea? Next up is memorizing your speech. How do we memorize it once we've got our first draft put together and it's good enough to take to the first tournament? Well, the first strategy is to memorize by sentence. You read a sentence out loud 3 times, and then you try to say it without reading it, and then you read it again to check for errors. You can also memorize in chunks. Get your attention-getting device and your tie into your topic 100% memorized before your background and your thesis. You can also memorize your problem number 1 before you memorize your problem number 2. And then you can memorize by points. Get the entire introduction down perfectly before you try and memorize your first main point. Get your third main point memorized before you get your conclusion memorized. All of those types of things. Some helpful techniques for how to memorize your speech would be memorizing by color, highlighting each sentence in a different color based on the emotion that it is primarily leaning into or conveying. You can also look at cue words. Highlight the last couple of words in each sentence in white so that you can't see them anymore and then see if you can give the speech fully memorized. If you ever forget, cover your cursor over it and it will turn blue and the text will be white and legible. And then basically you're slowly removing more and more of the visible text until only the first word is not white anymore on every single sentence. And if you can give your speech just from the first sentence or the first word of each sentence, you're pretty much memorized. You can also lip sync your speech. Record yourself giving the speech out loud and then listen to it over and over again and mouth along and talk along, kind of like you were singing along to a song on the radio. You can also have a line caller, give somebody a copy of your speech and then recite the speech to them, but have them cut you off or correct you or remind you every time that you slip up or every time that you forget. And if you've been saying something the same way for weeks now and you didn't even realize that it was wrong in your script, then tell them to write down the thing that you have been saying if you like it better than what you originally wrote down. Lastly is give yourself time to memorize. I know that it's tempting to put off memorizing until the night before or 2 nights before, but if you want to be memorized well enough that you don't even have to worry about it and you can focus on how you're saying what you're saying instead of what you're saying when you're at the tournament, then make a goal to be fully memorized 5 days before the tournament. Try not to memorize more than one full point of a speech per day. So maybe you memorize the intro on Sunday, the first main point on Monday, the second main point on Tuesday, the third main point on Wednesday, and then the conclusion on Thursday. And then you compete Friday. So if you're gonna procrastinate, don't procrastinate memorizing the entire speech, because trying to memorize more than one main point in a single day when you have a job, when you have other activities, or even if you don't, is really, really difficult. Now we're going to talk about visual aids in informative speaking, which is the part of this video that took me the longest to make. And the reason why I really took the time is because I think that this is the hardest part of learning informative speaking as a coach and as a student. And I have made the most comprehensive guide that I think exists to how to do visual aids. So there's three main types of visual aids in informative speaking that we commonly see get used. The first is poster boards. If you've done informative speaking before, that's probably went right to your mind, is the posters. 56 out of 60, or 93% of speeches that have made it to finals used poster boards. These are going to have photos, labels, diagrams, graphics, images to illustrate your speech's ideas. Most people end up making posters. There's only 3 speeches that have made it to finals with visual aids that are not posters, and there's only 1 speech that has ever made it to NSDA finals with none of these things at all. So chances are you're gonna have to make, some sort of posters or handhelds or props if the highest level of success is something you want. Now, to clarify, in the rules, it says that visual aids are not required, and it is better to have no visual aids than to have bad visual aids. But a great speech with great visual aids is always going to do better than a great speech with no visual aids. So just accept that if you don't want to do visual aids, you probably should do a different event. The second most common type of visual aid is handhelds, which are not as common in Idaho, but are kind of sweeping the nation and especially the final stage. They're in 38 out of 60, or 63.33% of speeches that have made it to finals. And if you look at just the last 5 years, it's more like 80% of the speeches that have made it to finals. These are smaller or medium-sized posters or photos or placards or signs that are not necessarily attached or part of your posters. They don't really go on the display part of the visual aid stand. They're often also made with like construction paper and things like that. And then the third kind of visual aid that is frequently used, in addition to these other 2 things, is props. Props could be books and magazines, which kind of just seem like handhelds, but a lot of the times it's just external physical objects that are not printed or mini posters. They are 3D objects used to exemplify your topic. That was in about 28 out of 60 speeches, or about 46.66%. When you are making your visual aids, there's 3 things that you need to keep in mind, no matter what kind it is. Complexity, how difficult are the visual aids to operate? Interactivity, how often do you have to manipulate the visual aids or touch them? And then busyness, how many visual elements are we seeing at once when we look at them? Now, what I observed from the speeches and finals is that visual aids are anywhere from very simple to operate to very complex to operate, but usually it's somewhere in the middle ground. If you have to be touching the speech more than 10 times a minute, it's probably too busy, right? But then you have interactivity, which is that kind of thing that I was just talking about. How often are you touching it? But with complexity, if there's a big risk that it could go wrong, you probably don't want to do it, right? There's very few speeches that are taking huge risks where if they do one thing wrong, their whole visual aid is going to fall apart. So your visual aid should not function as a Jenga tower. It should look really easy to manipulate your visual aids to the point where you barely even have to look at it while you're touching it, but it might be really complex. The complexity should be hidden to the audience. And then lastly is busyness. Most visual aids, even if there are more than 1, 2, or 3 things to look at, we're not supposed to be looking at more than 1, 2, or 3 things at a time. So maybe it starts blank and then you add things slowly, or it starts with 1, 2, or 3 things and then you add more. But the first time that we see a visual aid, we should not be bombarded with an insane amount of information unless your speech is about an insane amount of information. So let's talk about the basics of visual aids in informative speaking. While they're not required, it's very rare to see, again, an informative speech without them win. The reason we have visual aids is to enhance and supplement your message, to reinforce the audience's understanding by emphasizing and exemplifying key pieces of information. Always ask yourself, why am I using visual aids? What do I want my speech to do? And how is visual aids the best way to do that for my audience? If your goal is to teach the audience, then every visual aid has to be there to teach the audience, not just to make them go, oh, wow, that's cool. Remember that you cannot use electronic equipment, anything that requires cords, batteries, or power. You can't use live elements, animals, or additional people. You can't use costumes, illegal materials, weapons, or drugs, or distribution of items like food, objects, or flyers to the judges or audience members before, during, or after the round. None of those types of visual aids are allowed. What do you need for materials? Well, I've made a visual aid supplies list that you can check out. That's pretty comprehensive, but you're going to need a display stand and a carrying case. You're going to need arts and crafts supplies. Most posters that are in finals are rectangular shaped black foam poster boards or mat board poster boards. Some people use white or rarely other colors. Some people cut their boards into different shapes related to their topic. Sometimes people use thinner poster paper instead of foam boards, but then you've got to have like a table in front or beside you to like lay the boards on every single time you're done with them instead of just like cycling them to the back of your stand. And you can also make handhelds out of the same materials. A lot of the handheld posters are just a foam poster board that was cut into a certain shape. So what about the logistics of visual aids? While every single one is different, there are some common principles that I learned from watching all of the NSDA final speeches. The average number of posters is 7.55, and the median and mode number of posters is 7. I only looked at the speeches that had posters, so I didn't include like the no visual aid speeches in that. 68% of speeches in finals are using between 5 to 8 posters. If you have more than 8 posters, you're probably using the thinner poster paper kind, because most visual aid stands, like little kegs, are not big enough to accommodate more than 8 foam boards. A lot of people, when they change their posters, are just moving the poster they just used, if they're done with it, to the very back. And you usually have at least one side of one of your posters that is blank and black, so that when you're not referencing a visual aid, you can kind of put it away, kind of like the picture you see here, to avoid distracting the audience. But when you're not using a poster, it's just kind of sitting on the grips that are on your stand. Some people, when they're done with the poster, take it off completely, but that means that you either have to like have a table or a desk next to you, which you are not guaranteed to have at tournaments, or you have to lay it down on the floor or against the stand, which could restrict your moving around or competing space or get the boards damaged. So be careful with that. You probably want to do some modifications to your visual aid stand once you've created your visual aids to help you. So many people are attaching bins or totes or trays to the center triangular support bars of their visual aid stands. You can see that in the example here. And that's great, because then you can put all of your like little extra attachments and detachments inside the little tray. And you don't have to just hope that there's a table to put them on, or put them in like pockets or things like that. And you can arrange them in such a way that's really convenient for you. It also just looks really sleek. Other things that people do is they attach hooks or chip clips or like hammock things to their visual aid stands. You can't see that in almost any of the finals round speeches because they are hidden behind the poster boards, but essentially the triangular bars of the visual aid stands, using duct tape or using glue or using electrical tape, attach like chip clip bags or things like that to hold up the bigger types of props or handhelds that you don't want the audience to see yet, but are too big to fit inside your little tray. If you want some examples or to just learn how to make great visual aids, just watch all of the informative speeches and finals. You can watch them on 2x speed and just look at the visual aids. You can watch them with the volume off and just look at the visual aids. Not that I would necessarily recommend that, but even if you don't have the resource package, there are 24 finals speeches on YouTube that I've put in a playlist. Watch them and you will understand how to, you'll be able to see what you want to do, and then you've just got to kind of figure out through trial and error how to reverse engineer it. So the first part of visual aids that we'll go more in depth on are posters. Posters are the most common and most important part of a visual aid. And while every poster is different, there are some commonalities between the ones that seem to make it the farthest. First is keep it simple. Most posters in NSDA finals do not have more than 1 to 3 visual elements that we are supposed to be looking at a time. When visual aids have more elements, they usually start hidden and are then revealed, or they are attached to the poster board as you are talking. The posters also need to be clear and readable. Design posters for the back of the room. Everything needs to be big enough that somebody 20 feet away would be able to easily interpret your posters. That means the images need to be high resolution, have good print quality, and be easy to make out from a distance. Text should be used sparingly, and the letters need to be big. Your posters should not be less than 20 by 30 almost ever. You also need to balance your focus as a speaker. You need to spend enough time gesturing at or emphasizing your posters that the audience looks to them to learn more, but not so often that they are being distracted from listening to you or understanding your words. You also need to look at and interact with your visual aid often enough to keep it moving, but not so often that you're failing to make eye contact with the judge. When you want the audience to focus on just your face and your hand gestures, put the blank cover poster back on front. And I would not suggest having more than 8 interactive elements, so things that you attach or detach, things that you flip or reveal per poster. Otherwise, you're just not going to be able to make enough of like a direct connection to the audience. You need to practice to ensure smooth handling. Your visual aid should take you 5 minutes or less to set up and take down, and you should practice that process until it's very efficient. You got to make sure you're not late to round or that you don't irritate or inconvenience your judges and your competitors with how long that it's taking you to set it up. You need to practice delivering your speech with your visual aid over and over again until it is flawless. This includes attachments and detachments, rearranging and flipping your posters around, revealing and folding things out, etc. You should consider using a bin or a tote to hold your props that would sit on like the middle triangular bars of your visual aid stand, or having a desk in front or behind you or beside you to put your visual aid elements on when they are not being used. And you've got to make sure that you don't have too many posters or visual aid elements, that they are too big to fit in your visual aid bag or stand. Next, with posters, we've got to think about pictures, which are the most common things to include on your posters. So with pictures, here are my tips. Make it big. Most speeches in NSDA finals have 1 or more posters with just 1, 2, or 3 images that basically take up the entire space of the poster. Some posters do have collages or textual elements with 4 to 6 small or medium-sized photos. But if a picture does not need to be so huge to be clearly seen that it should take up most of your visual aid board, then maybe make it a handheld instead of a poster on your visual aid. You also need to make the pictures pop. High resolution, sharp images stand out and draw the audience in. Help them be easily seen by avoiding crowding them with other elements, or outline the pictures in a non-poster size photo of colored construction paper. So if the picture is not so big that it takes up the whole poster, consider outlining the picture if there's going to be like black space around it in colorful construction paper, or a white or black border like this one to make it stand out more. You also need to make it meaningful. Great visual aids humanize your speech's content and make the information real and tangible to the audience. If you share a story, have a photo of the person that it's about. If you talk about a problem, show an example of its effects. If you talk about a historical event, show an old-timey photo of it. Visual aids help us empathize with information and make what is boring exciting. You also need to make it count. They say that a picture is worth 1,000 words, so don't talk over your pictures if you don't have to. If you're running out of words when you're writing, consider sharing some information via the visual aid and let it speak for itself. Don't write a speech that will make your visual aid redundant, and vice versa. When in doubt, more pictures is better than more words on the visual aid. And make it change. It is extremely uncommon at this point within the last 5 years for visual aids that make it to finals to have pictures that seem static or whole, and that don't ever move, right? What is common is that it seems like the picture is just that, a picture, but then all of a sudden they flip something down or up or left or right. or they remove something and then all of a sudden there was something behind the picture or in the background of the picture, or that is cut into the picture that we didn't see before. Maybe it's a different photo or it's a statistic, or something else, right? The audience loves when they are surprised that there is more to your visual aid than their first thought there would be. You also need to make it stick. Photos are more likely to stand out to audiences if they are given enough time to see the photo before the poster changes or if the photo is removed, but you don't want it to be sitting there staring at them for so long that it stops being interesting or it stops holding their focus, or that it is so interesting that they stop listening to you. Also, some people cite their photos in like the corners of their speeches, because you do have to cite your photos, I think, in some state rules on the visual aids in the corner. But as long as it's in your like APA works cited page, you don't have to put the citation on the visual aid board, but some people like to do it. Maybe it makes your speech seem more credible, but it can also, limit your space. So now let's look at some examples of pictures on posters. I got all of these from screenshots of the videos that are in the playlist. So you can see we have some photos that are outlined in colorful construction paper to help make them pop. This is a poster that has 3 images on it, and they are blown up to take up the entire space of the picture. We have 2 pictures that are blown up to take up the entire space of the poster down here. Sometimes you might orient the posters differently, like most of the time your posters are horizontal, but then sometimes you make them vertical. And then here are some examples of what I'm talking about with cutouts, where these photos, when you first see them, look like they are just photos, but then they can remove something or flip something or reveal something, and there's other pictures or words behind them. Those are really cool and seem to do really well in finals. So now let's talk about text, graphics, and manipulating posters. They need great pictures, catchy labels, interesting graphics, and clear models. So for text, there should always be more pictures than words, but words are still great. When you use words, make it pop by choosing bold but legible fonts for captions, taglines, and simpler or easier to read fonts for key data points, facts, and quotes. You can also make it simple. Unless words are the primary focus of a poster, like it's a quote or a screenshot of an article or a social media post or a law, don't have more than 5 words for us to focus on at once on any given poster. On this example, this poster started out where it was just the number showing, and then as she revealed new information, she revealed a new block of text. So she's not starting with 6 sentences or phrases on the poster, she's revealing them one at a time so that we don't get overwhelmed with textual information. Graphics, icons, and images. Photos aren't the only kind of, visual element that we want to include. You need to make it real. If your topic is abstract, confusing, or unknown to the audience, it's going to be really hard for them to think about it or focus on it if they don't have a mental image for reference. Use charts, diagrams, maps, portraits, models, everything like that to help give them that mental picture if they've never seen or thought about it before. You also need to make it familiar. Sometimes the best way to simplify something is to give us a visual shorthand for it. Using emojis is really common, or like emoji clip art symbols in finals is really common because they're easily recognizable and they are small but simple stand-ins for more complex information. Then with manipulating posters, it's not unheard of for a poster to just sit there and that there's nothing to interact with it, but it's rare at this point in NSDA finals. So you need to make your posters move. Most have at least one poster that changes before it goes away. That means that things are attached or detached. That means that things are flipped or folded to reveal information. That means that elements are shifted, pulled by strings and levers to move around the board. This keeps the audience's attention and means that you get more out of the visual aid, because you're probably not going to be talking about one photo for 3 minutes. But if you talk about the photo for 30 seconds and then the next thing you bring up, you can change the photo to apply to the new thing. Basically, instead of having to have a whole new board, you can change the board to show whole new information. Using a small basket or hanging device inside your visual aid that is like hidden behind the posters if it's hanging or like resting in that small basket that you can find to put on the bars is a good way to keep track of things. But you also might want to make your posters flip. to save space, because poster boards, especially the foam kind, are really thick, many people put stuff on both sides of one or more of their boards, so that when they finish talking about one point, instead of having to shuffle around to the next board, they can flip over to the backside, and now there's new information to show. Flipping it midpoint when transitioning to a new idea can be very effective, but rarely do you want the audience looking at the same poster for more than 2 minutes if you're not manipulating it. Otherwise, they're going to get bored and either look away, or they're going to hyper focus on it to try and analyze it for every little detail. So here are some examples of using text and graphics, not necessarily pictures, on your visual aids. The text is big enough in these cases that the audience should be able to read it from about 20 feet away. There are models, there's emojis being used, there's things being flipped and added and revealed. So these are great examples of text and graphics on speeches. So next up, we're going to talk about the second most common type of poster element in informative speaking, which are handheld posters. Now, handheld posters are a little bit more open and creative to what people can do with them, because you're not limited by the same shapes and sizes, and you don't have to keep them displayed on your board because they're only going to be shown for a little bit as you're holding them. But they are typically like smaller or medium-sized posters, and you can make them using the same materials that you would use to make your regular posters for your visual aid stands. So here are some general rules to know about them. The reason that you would put something on a handheld instead of on a poster is maybe that it is simpler, so it doesn't need to be on a poster. You really want it to stand out to the audience, so you can bring it closer to them or emphasize it with your hands. Or maybe it would take up too much space or not enough room on a poster. It's also a good idea to put stuff on handhelds that doesn't need to be seen for a very long time, because then it's not just sitting in front of the audience for forever on a poster. You can also only use it for a little bit and then get back to just using your hands. So it's a good way to show something fast, get their attention on it for sure, and then put it away. In terms of simplicity, each handheld element should really only be displaying one main image, idea, or statement at a time. You don't want the audience to get confused as to what they're supposed to be looking at, because you're not going to be holding it for longer than 20 seconds almost ever, and even 20 seconds is pushing it. So photos, social media posts, captions, and graphics all make great handhelds. Now, handhelds are also often interactive, just like posters are. Something can be flipped or folded or moved to reveal new information, often like statistics. And you can also put stuff on the back of your handheld, just like your poster, so that they can be flipped around and used a second time, which reduces the amount of materials you need and the amount of space that they would take up. One of the most common kinds of handhelds is a flip book, where it looks like a poster that has somehow been folded in half, and then it opens up like a book, and then you can continue flipping pages, and each page is a new poster. And we'll talk a little bit more about how to make those on the next slide. When you want to stand out with your handhelds, because they're smaller, they can be harder to see if you don't make them the proper size, if you don't have really good like focus in the images. And oftentimes, if it's a photo, you want to make a background of like a border of construction paper to help the photo stand out. You can also use bold text and bright colors. If something is big enough to be a handheld, but it's not the right size for a poster, how might you keep them stored properly? Well, you can use either a table or a desk nearby you, or what I prefer is you can modify your visual aid stands using duct tape or hot glue or electrical tape to sort of hang hooks or chip clip bags from the 3 bars, but put those things behind the area where the posters are going to be hiding things, so that no one from the audience will be able to see it, and then you can hang your handhelds from those things. Or you can just put your handhelds inside of your little box or your tray or your bin that you're balancing on those center triangular reinforcement bars of your visual aid stand. So now here are some examples of handheld posters. You can see that it's pretty common to have photos. There are some people using charts or maps or diagrams. You'll see on the bottom left-hand corner and in the upper right and bottom right-hand corner that there are picture flip books that are going up and down. So each of those photos, you'll see a tiny fold in the center, and it's because they are moving through photos on those visual aids. You'll also see that some of the photos are outlined in construction paper to make them pop more. Sometimes they're just photos. But yeah, these are all examples of good handhelds. Here are some more examples as well. So you can see here that we've got differently shaped ones. Oftentimes they're used to show statistics or definitions. Sometimes text is better if it's just a little bit of text on a handheld than it would be on, just a poster. And there's an example of the kind of flip books that I'm talking about down here with Wong Kim Ark. It's going to open up, and there's another one over here. You can see the person flipping the photo page right there as well. So those are all some good examples of flip book or handhelds that are all easily observable in the playlist of NSDA final speeches that is on my channel. So now we're going to talk about the strategy behind visual aids in informative speaking and how do we make some of these amazing things that you've seen in finals. But the first kind that we'll talk about is making flip books, where essentially you either on a poster or on a handheld have a series of posters on thinner poster paper that you are going to layer on top of each other and connecting like the back blank sides together so that you can open them up and basically get multiple different full-sized picture posters off of one main board or off of a piece of cardboard. So to kind of try and demonstrate this, I've got a couple pieces of paper. And so if you look here, let's say that this is my first poster that I want people to see, right? My pages. So I've made my poster, I've folded it in half, and there's an image on the left and the right that I want to show. So I'm going to attach the back side of one half of this to like a piece of cardboard or to a poster so that it is firmly glued in place. But then I have my other poster that I also created. And essentially, you're going to put the two back sides together so that now, when the audience first sees it, it just looks like a normal poster. But then I can flip over and now there's another part. So essentially, you've made both of your posters, you folded them on the halfway mark, and then you take the blank back sides and you glue them together. And you just keep doing that, gluing the back half sides together that are blank so that you can flip through until you're done. And you reinforce the back half of the last page on the cover poster on the piece of cardboard. And that's how you make a flip book. It's kind of like an elementary school homemade card or art project. But even though most people in finals are using foam or mat board for their overall posters, you can also, a lot of the times people are using thinner poster paper and then they are just putting all of the designs on the thinner poster paper, like the 50 cents per sheet kind that you get from Walmart, and then they're pasting that onto the foam board. That's also the technique that we use when we want to make a reveal. So instead of gluing pictures directly to the foam board, people will glue those elements to thinner poster paper and then attach the poster paper to the foam board. Then before they attach that, they use Photoshop or a knife in real life to essentially cut out part of the image that they will later remove, or that they don't cut out the full image, they just cut out most of the outline, but this part is left intact so that they can fold it down to show something new. But essentially inside Photoshop or in the real world, you cut out a shape of the picture that has been put on regular poster paper, and then the same size hole or whatever that you cut out, you design something that you want to be revealed underneath it. So a statistic, another photo, right? On the regular foam board, you paste that little cutout sheet on there, and then you put the poster paper with the picture on top of that. So when the audience sees the poster paper with the regular picture, it just looks like a full and complete picture. But then you can either fold it up or down or left or right, or you can remove it entirely if you've like magnetized it, and then there's something hidden behind it or underneath it. So that is kind of how people typically end up doing reveals. People also pull elements around on their posters using strings, levers, pulleys, tabs. Many elements on the poster are not meant to be removed or attached, but instead they have their positioning change and move around the board. Some good examples of this are the superheroes and aviation speeches from NSDA finals, and those are on the playlist that I've made. You'll also want to consider getting many parts of your visual aid laminated because it will avoid them getting torn, worn, or damaged when you are attaching or detaching things to your visual aids. And with your attachments, things that you add and like take off the posters, if you don't want to use Velcro, even though Velcro is like convenient, it doesn't fall off as often, but it's visible and it makes a noise, you can instead use magnets. So you want to put really, really strong magnets on like the back of your foam boards. You can push them directly into the black foam and then you can glue them in place. And to really make sure that they stay, you can cover them up with like sheets of poster paper that are each glued on top of each other so that the magnets are still, but you have to get like Imodium magnets, like 20 millimeter Imodium magnets that will still be strong on the outside. And then each of your attachments will either have small circular magnets on them, or you can get like magnet tape or magnet rolls. Some schools have even bought sheets of sheet metal and then cut out like thin strips of it with tin snips to then put like almost like little kid fridge magnets or like fridge magnets that are like the floppy kind. You can basically create those for your visual aids so that they're easy to put on and take off without them falling. Some people use a combination of magnets and Velcro so that maybe when they're set up, it's just magnetized so that it's easy to pull off. But if they put something on and they're afraid of it falling over when they flip things around or when they move things around, there's also Velcro and they just have to push a little harder to activate the Velcro and then it will stay in place for the rest of the speech. And you can also, again, if you're worried about the magnet showing or sticking out or falling off, glue the magnet to the attachment or detachment and then put construction paper and glue that to the back of your attachment, covering the magnet so that it's still strong enough to attach, but it's being extra held firmly in place. Now let's talk about props, which are different than like the printed out photos and text and graphics and things like that are typically on our posters and on our handhelds. While these are not as common, they are really cool and can really make your speech stand out. You should use them to help the audience visualize abstract concepts, serve as an analogy for your points, allow you to demonstrate a process, or make something that seems really far-fetched or unrealistic seem real. External props are also really helpful when you can't just put it on a poster because it's three-dimensional or it's too large. What props should you use? Well, if your topic is a science and technology topic, try and have a real version of the thing that you're explaining or that you're teaching about, or have like something to serve as like a science fair project model almost. If you talk about examples of inventions or tools or helpers related to your topic, have one with you. If you reference books, magazines, music, games, have a physical copy of those things to hold up and show the audience. And if you talk about a physical object in your speech, you can consider having that physical object with you to show as a prop. Now, with interactivity, unless the prop is just showing us something that we haven't really seen before or making something real, it should be used to demonstrate what you are talking about or doing, but then props should be hidden before you use them, and then hidden again. So how do you make your props stand out? Cool props make it easy for your speech to stand out and be memorable because they're more uniquely shaped and specific to your topic than the typical poster or even handheld is going to be. Try not to use a prop that would be able to work with anyone else's speech. It should be very specific to your topic because otherwise you run the risk of somebody else having the same prop or it just kind of seeming like showboaty, and then it's not really purposeful. And lastly, what do you do with the props when they're not being used? You can keep them out of the way and hidden. Either they should be, on a table if they're not going to be too distracting, or if they're small enough, they can be inside your bin or your tray that you put inside your visual aid stand, or using electrical tape, duct tape, or hot glue, you can hang hooks or chip clips from like the bars of your visual aid stands on the parts that are hidden behind your posters, and they can be hanging up behind your posters unseen until you actually bring them out on purpose. Here are some examples of props that people have used in NSDA finals. So we've got cartons or food products, bouncy balls, balloons, items of clothing, books, fashion items, canned air because the speech was about clean air, stuffed animals, hair care accessories, water jugs, water bottles, teaspoons, advertisements, balloons. Um, those are all different examples of props. Next, with visual aids, there are some trends that I have noticed in finals that basically every single speech, or not every single speech, but 50% of the speeches that are in finals within the last 5 or 6 years and even earlier typically have at least a couple of these elements. Very common to see maps of affected states. The top 3 photos up here in the corner, each of these speeches was like, here are the states where these laws apply or where these laws don't apply. Uh, Childhood photos. People's attention getting devices are about them as kids, so they have photos, as you can see here, of them as kids. Celebrities, politicians, or historical figures. There are tons of speeches where if you're talking about members of Congress or presidents, you want a picture of those people, or of celebrities or historical figures. Old-timey history textbook looking photos, where they're like that yellowish brown color or they're black and white, things like that. The photos that you see up here, very common for people, or the photos that you see down here, very common for people to have. The same thing goes with historic artwork or paintings. If it's like a hand-drawn old looking image or like a old Renaissance style painting or something that looks like you'd see it in a museum or in a textbook, very common to have printouts of photos that look like that, as you can see here. You also, if there's ever anything to mention about like protests or social movements, pretty frequent that we see pictures of that. You can see those referenced down here. We also have phone images or screenshots or cutouts of phones that we're starting to see more and more, like you see over here. Posts from social media that have been blown up, like the tweets that are up here, or Instagram posts or, TikTok posts and things like that people blow up and make a poster or a handheld. We also often see headlines from articles or research papers, legal briefings blown up. You can see down here we've got like a Wikipedia article and like a news article. Photos of like specific communities that are being affected or impacted by the topic is pretty common, especially if they're communities that might be unknown or marginalized. Advertisements and logos. You can see like old-timey and present advertisements over here. Hand-drawn posters are decently common. They showcase your artist skills and they look really cool. And if you're a great artist or if you have students that are great artists, it's a cool way for them to show their uniqueness. And then lastly, tons of speeches are showing like statistics or representations of like numbers and humans using stick figures. There's examples of the stick figures down here. I'm going to say 15 or more speeches that have made it to finals have like stick figure doesn't feel right. It's like the bathroom outline of a person icon somewhere in their speech is seen everywhere. It's also in like the biraciality hot dog fried rice speech and a whole bunch of others. So maybe it's not just that each of the speeches that make it to finals happen to have images of these. It's that speeches that make it to finals talk about these issues that images are helpful in exemplifying. But those are just things to keep in mind. Finally done with visual aids, so let's talk about delivery and rehearsal. You need to sound like a human being and not a speech kid when you are giving your speeches. So it should reflect your personality. You need to find a balance between being conversational and professional, because you're a 15-year-old to an 18-year-old, so you want to maybe talk a little bit more professionally than you normally would so people take you seriously, but not so professionally that you seem like a robot or like you're talking down to the audience. You can take on various personas, right? Different attitudes as you speak. Sometimes you're going to sound like a credible expert. Other times you should sound like a friend to the audience. You're an enthusiast about your topic, or other times you're a comedian. Sometimes you are out there preaching, and sometimes you're inspiring. How do we sound like a human? I always struggled with being a robot when I did my speeches, so here are some things that you can do. Sit down like you are at a coffee shop with a friend and talk your speech to them, and, react and maybe have them respond and then you say the next line of your speech. So talk like you're in a conversation and it will automatically sound more human. You can also call your friend on the phone or on FaceTime and like while you're folding your laundry or making dinner, give your speech to them and talk to them like you're catching up. You can talk to your friends in the hallway as though you're in between classes and give your speeches there. And you can give your speech while doing something fun, hanging out with a friend, so that those vibes are infiltrating your delivery. And then you just listen to what it sounds like or record it and then emulate it later. How do we practice emotional variety? Go through the script of your speech and say every single sentence leading or leaning into a different emotion. Like pull up an emotion wheel on Google and say it when you're disgusted, say it when you're angry, say it when you're sad, say it when you're oppressed. What about disappointed, right? Say each line leaning into a different emotion until you find the emotion that seems like it fits best. And ask yourself, how should the audience feel when they hear this? If you want them to feel a certain way, unless you're trying to like shock or misdirect them, sound that way and they will probably feel that way. How do we practice vocal delivery? Because that is very important. Here are a bunch of different things to consider when you are partway through the season and the script is where you want it to be and the visual aid is where you want it to be. You need to systematically break down your vocal delivery and consider all of these different factors. The rate or pace of your speech, how fast are you talking? The pauses, the attentional silences for effect. Volume and projection. How loud are you? How far does your voice reach? Pitch. How high or low is your voice? Tone. What is the emotional color of your voice? Articulation. Are you properly formatting the sounds? Enunciation. Are you speaking words clearly? Pronunciation. Are you using fluency? Are you smooth and uninterrupted in your flow? Do you have filler words or unnecessary sounds or words? What's your inflection or the variation of your pitch? Breath control. How do you manage when to breathe in and when to breathe out? And your energy level. How lively and intense is your voice? So those are all things to consider with vocal delivery. Then we have physical delivery. So these are your hand gestures. How do you move your hands and fingers for emphasis? Try and stay inside the gesture zone. So hold your arms straight out in front of you like you're Frankenstein. And then drop them to just below your belly button. And that kind of box that you can outline for yourself is generally where your gesture should stay. You should also think about your facial expressions. How do you show your emotions through your eyes, your eyebrows, your mouth, your nose, your head tilt, and things like that? Your body posture. Are you upright, open, and confident, or are you leaning forward or to the side, or are your shoulders hunched? How do you use space? Where are you going to move? As an informative speaker, you don't really have like a diamond per se. Some people stay in the same spot the whole time. Some people switch to the left or right side of their posters when they're switching between main points, which I think is a good strategy. Sometimes when you want the audience to focus on just you, you stand in front of your posters. So you've got to think about how are you using space. You also want to think about eye contact. Have an engaging gaze with the audience. Proxemics, how far away are you going to be from the audience? That's especially important to consider with your handhelds. How close do you get? Orientation, are you directly facing or indirectly facing the audience? Don't only focus on one part of the audience, even if there's only one person in the room, because that can get overwhelming for them. And then distractors, are you playing with your hands, playing with your face, rocking back and forth, playing with your clothing, swaying? All of those are things to consider in your physical delivery. So here are my resources for informative speaking, because they are hard to find, they are rare, and that's why this video is so long and so comprehensive, because all of this information, it's very hard to find anywhere else, but there are some good places to look. First up, whether you're a student or a coach or a judge, everybody should take the Intro to Coaching Informative Speaking and Original Oratory NSDA Learn course on speechanddebate.org. It is wonderful. It gives such great information. It will help you as a teammate. It will help you as a presidency member. It will help you as a coach, as an assistant, as a judge. Take it. Also, whether you're a teacher or not, look at the Start Here Teaching Public Address curriculum set, and you can look for activities and practice drills and resources and their favorite examples and all of those types of things. So the curriculum and the activities, it's like 100 pages of stuff for how to teach oratory and inform. So very useful. You can also take the brief judge training that the NSDA requires for all judges at nationals for informative speaking and oratory. because that tells you what your judges are going to kind of be looking for and can serve as a starting point. It's also kind of the best really short overview, because this is not a short overview of the event. So if you're introducing the speech types to like novices, you may want to show the training videos. And lastly, my number one resource. While it took a long time, it was totally worth it for me to watch every single finals round. Inform is one of the newest speech events, so there's only 60 of them. It really doesn't take that long in comparison to all the other events to say that you've seen every single informative speech. If you watch one informative speech that has made it to finals a day for 6 days a week, you can watch every informative speech in 10 weeks. And so that would be a huge advantage to you for getting ideas, for just figuring out how to phrase things. And again, you're not copying any of these people's topics or their visual aids, but you are just kind of seeing the patterns, because I've tried my best to explain the patterns, but until you see them for yourself, it's very hard to kind of recreate them. What about the NSDA has some webinars? The speech breakdowns by one of the former national champions who gave her speech on the Second Amendment. Phenomenal video. There's one of them that's free on YouTube, but the rest of them are on the NSDA's resource page for package subscribers. If you haven't seen it, please watch it. It is extremely helpful. What about YouTube? You can watch the final speech breakdown that I just talked about for the free one on YouTube. That is the very next video that you should watch. She explains some of the stuff that I talk about here in a lot more depth and talks about how she thought about writing her formative more conceptually. And I think that's really helpful for students and coaches. There's a really short kind of basic introductory video that doesn't have that many views, but would serve as more of like a starting point for like a student's like, hey, I want to learn about informative, but they're like brand new to it. You don't want to scare them off with this. Maybe you show them the smaller video. But also, if you don't have the resource package or you're not a member school and of the NSDA, you can still watch 24 of the 60 finals round speeches just on YouTube by clicking on this playlist. So those are some great resources. Here are my final thoughts and my resources for informative speaking. I have created a rubric that you can use, a checklist for preparing an informative speech that you can use, a topic approval form, a winter break prep, or you could even do this over the summertime if there's still time for that checklist. I've created a base template, but I'm going to be editing that. It'll be the same link, but plan on it kind of changing. And then I'm also, you know how we talked about like the 6 different types of first main points, the 8 different types of second main points. I'm going to try and create mini outlines for each of those on a separate document that I've linked here, so that check in later for those to be finished. So here's my final advice. If it's not broke, don't fix it, originate it, right? So if you find something that's really cool, find a way to make it your own. Brand new stuff in informative speaking is cool, but there's patterns that seem to be creating norms, the same way that problems causes solutions, causes effect solutions is the norm in oratory, or teaser, intro, rest of the piece is the norm in interp. There's norms in extemp. Inform seems like, oh, it has the fewest norms that you have to follow, but the patterns are pretty clear. There just haven't been any resources that point them out. So find a way to take the patterns and make them your own if you are worried about being too different. Ask yourself what you really want most from your speech. Some speeches, depending on the topics or the content that you want to talk about, is just not going to perform as well in front of all audiences. But if what you care about is you getting to talk about that point in the way that you want to talk about it, maybe making it to the final stage isn't your biggest concern, in which case you have a lot more maybe creative freedom than you would otherwise. Remember who your audience likely is. Your judge could be anyone, which means you need to have stuff that would appeal to everyone. You need jokes that if they don't appeal to every person in the room, there should be a joke that would appeal to the old guy sitting in the back and a joke that would appeal to the barista looking person in the back, right? So have something in your speech for everyone. Every type of person should have a moment from your speech that they will walk away being pleasantly surprised by and positively remembering, even if your topic is kind of like against them or against their personal values. You learn from the best of the best. Watch those finals rounds videos. Watch your state finals rounds videos. If you don't break at a tournament, watch finals. When you are in round, take notes on your opponent's speeches. What things do you really like about them, or are they doing better than you that you need to find ways to outmatch them on? Learn from your competitors, like I was just saying. Don't give into trends unless they serve you, right? Like some of the stuff that I'm talking about might be a trend, or in a couple years might be different, or maybe this stuff really holds up. Don't follow a trend unless it will benefit your specific topic and your specific speech. Have fun. Don't only care about winning or only care about making a difference. You should be enjoying yourself. If you're not having fun anymore, change the speech, change the topic, change the visual aids, change something, right? If you're not having fun, don't keep doing it the same way for the whole season, because eventually everyone will be able to tell that you're not having fun. And if all you care about is winning, you'll stop winning if you're not having fun. Lastly, don't sacrifice your speaking content for improving your visual aids. There is no reason to worry about making awesome visual aids when you're not memorized, or when everyone tells you that the content of your speech isn't good. Visual aids make the difference between two amazing speeches. They cannot overcome a bad speech. So that is the end of this very long, very comprehensive video for how to succeed, prepare, and perform in informative speaking. Part 2 of my overall series. The next video that I'll probably do in this series will be for extemporaneous speaking. And then after that, maybe I'll hit the other Idaho platform events like After Dinner or Sales or Communication Analysis. Please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe if you liked this video, and I wish you the best of luck in informative speaking.